Chapter 599. In noble consort Lu's palace. Although she didn't go to listen to the posthumous edict, the news still reached her ears very quickly. When she heard the news from the eunuch, noble consort Lu was sitting in the small garden in her palace, looking at the brilliant pear blossoms in the courtyard. A slightly cold breeze came out, sprinkling the ground like white snow. Although wrapped in the white fox cloak, noble consort Lu couldn't help but shiver. "Get out," noble consort Lu said coldly. The eunuch naturally didn't dare to say anything and scrambled out. He was afraid that before noble consort Lu was buried with him, his head would fall to the ground first. After telling the people around her to leave, noble consort Lu looked up at the snow-white tree in front of her. Pear blossoms were her favorite flowers. In her opinion, the snow-white pear blossoms were much more beautiful and noble than peonies, peach blossoms, orchids and plum blossoms. There were no pear trees in the original pears were very far away. The palace had always thought that pears were ominous. However, after she entered the palace, Missouri Jingqi planted several pear trees in the small garden in her palace to please her, just to make her smile. And now, she was buried with him. She knew that Mo Jingqi had always been cruel and merciless, but she never thought that he would use this on her one day. Sure enough, even if he died, he wanted her to be buried with him. Noble consort. His Highness, the Duke of Qin and the Prime Minister asked for an audience. The palace maid outside the door reported with trepidation. Noble consort Lu stood up, gathered the white fox cloak around her and said, "Let them in." Before long, the Crown Prince Mo Xiaoyan, who had been demoted to the Duke of Qin, and Prime Minister Lu appeared together and walked into the main hall. Following them were the fifth prince, who was 2 years younger than the Crown Prince, and the 14-year-old Princess Jin Ning. The fifth prince and Princess Jin Ning cried as soon as they saw noble consort Lu. Mother. Mother. Noble consort Lu wasn't a patient person to begin with. Right now she was very upset. When she heard the crying, the anger in her heart surged. She said harshly, "Why are you crying? I'm not dead yet." The fifth prince and Princess Jin Ning were originally worried about their mother. When they heard Imperial Father's posthumous edict to bury their mother, they eagerly followed the King of Qin and Prime Minister Lu over. Although noble consort Lu had always been indifferent to them, she was still their biological mother. Moreover, they had always admired this extremely beautiful mother of theirs. However, he did not expect to be scolded harshly the moment they met. The fifth prince's cries were immediately stifled in his chest, and his face flushed red due to the difficulty in breathing. Princess Jin Ning also bit the corner of her lips, stubbornly not making a sound. Mo Xiaoyan was only 12 years old, but because he was the eldest son of noble concubine Lu, Prime Minister Lu had paid special attention to him. Naturally, she was much calmer than her sister and brother. The crown prince was originally the rightful heir to the throne. However, because of an imperial edict from his father before his death, he had to submit to someone else. At this time he could still speak with a calm expression. It was enough to show that the Lu family had put in a lot of effort in cultivating him. Mo Xiaoyan frowned and said, "Imperial mother, second sister and fifth brother are worried about you." Noble consort Lu snorted and said indifferently, "What's the use of worrying? What can crying and wailing solve?" Mo Xiaoyan was silent. In fact, he did not have deep feelings for his mother. He was not second sister and fifth brother, who only had blind admiration and longing for his mother. He clearly understood that in his mother's eyes he and his sister should not exist, and he was just a tool that already existed. "Your Highness." Prime Minister Lu frowned and said in a deep voice. Speaking of this daughter, Prime Minister Lu only felt a great headache. Since she saw Mo Xiao when she was a child, this was the first time that her heart seemed to be attached to Mo Xiao. She had not given up for so many years. Not only was she cold and indifferent to the emperor, but she was also indifferent to her own children. If it were not for Mo Xiao, she would not even consider fighting for the position of crown prince for the King of Qin, let alone for her family. This was really the evil debt of her previous life. Prime Minister Lu thought that he was a ruthless and cold-blooded person. As an official, many people had died unjustly in his hands. However, no matter how cold-blooded he was, he still cared about his family and children. As for his daughter, except for Mo Xiao, she could abandon all the other families, her husband and her parents. Noble consort Lu still had some respect for her father, Prime Minister Lu. Hearing her father's disapproving tone, Noble consort Lu frowned and said indifferently, "Father, why are you here?" Prime Minister Lu said anxiously, "Why am I here? How can I not be here? You have heard the edict of the late emperor. Why don't you think of a way? Do you really want to be buried with the late emperor?" Speaking of Mo Jingqi, noble consort Lu curled her lower lip corner in disgust. At first she believed that Mo Jingqi cared about her, but now she didn't believe it at all. That man, he wanted to drag her to die with him after he died. Even if she had to die, she would never be buried in the same tomb as him. "Father, don't worry. I know what to do." Prime Minister Lu was stunned. "You have a way." The emperor also ordered the Empress Dowager to be buried with the late emperor, and King Li didn't raise any objection. At that time, King Li will keep a close eye on you and you may not be able to get away safely. Hearing Mo Jingli's name, noble consort Lu's face darkened. She gritted her teeth and said, "Mo Jingli." He ruined I's plan again. Prime Minister Lu sighed helplessly and said, "What's done is done. There's nothing we can do. The 10th prince will ascend the throne in a few days." "No." Noble consort Lu said coldly. "What's done is done. What else can we do?" Prime Minister Lu frowned and said. Noble consort Lu raised her chin and said coldly, "Since the 6th prince can be abolished, the 10th prince can be eliminated as well. The crown prince must be the one to ascend the throne. As long as the crown prince ascends the throne, the edict can be abolished and I don't have to be buried with him." Prime Minister Lu was shocked and angry. He stared at noble consort Lu and said, "You must be dreaming." At this time not only King Li but also great elder princess, the Empress Duke Hua and even Prince Ding are keeping an eye on the 10th prince. It's very difficult for us to kill him. Once it's discovered, do you think King Qin still has a chance to ascend the throne? At that time the Lu family will be buried with him and we will only work for others. Noble consort Lu smiled and said, "Father, do you think we're the only ones who want the 10th prince to die? King Li is no less scheming than us. I heard some interesting news. It said that King Li asked the emperor where his son was before he died." Prime Minister Lu was stunned. He certainly heard what King Li said at that time, but he cared more about the edict in the empress's hand at that time. After the edict was issued, they were shocked by the news of the edict. Naturally, they didn't have time to care about this problem. Noble consort Lu smiled and said, "Father, do you still remember that Mo Jingli and his family kicked their son to death 2 months ago?" Of course, Prime Minister Lu remembered. Although the Li mansion covered it up tightly, the Lu family and the Li mansion were political enemies. How could they not know such a big thing? Stroking his beard, Prime Minister Lu narrowed his eyes and said, "You mean?" Noble consort Lu smiled and said, "When Yi Ying was pregnant, she was imprisoned by the emperor. We only know that she gave birth to a son, but no one has seen the son. Of course, the emperor said it was not the son. I'm afraid that the child in the Li mansion is not King Li's son at all. The emperor has always been suspicious and King Li was the one who rebelled. How could the emperor not guard against him?" Chapter 600. Your Highness, do you know where the child is? Prime Minister Lu was overjoyed. Now, except for Yi Ying's son, King Li didn't have any other children. He didn't even have the news of his concubine's pregnancy. There had been some rumors in the capital. If that was true, then the value of this child was indeed beyond everyone's expectation. Noble concubine Lu shook her head and said, "I don't know. The emperor didn't tell anyone where the child is." Prime Minister Lu was a little disappointed, but noble concubine Lu said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. We haven't seen the child and King Li hasn't seen the child either. As long as my father makes the right arrangements." "Your Highness, you are right. I understand." Prime Minister Lu thought for a second and immediately understood what noble concubine Lu meant. He responded with a smile. No matter what was going on inside and outside the palace, the Prince Ding mansion was still peaceful and quiet. Until this evening, a handsome man in red knocked on the closed door of the Prince Ding mansion. In the study, Mo Shuyao lazily looked at Feng Jiao, who was covered in dust, and said blandly, "I don't remember asking you to come to the capital, Feng Jiao." Feng Jiao stood against the wall by the door and gave him a tired smile. After the new year, Feng Jiao's handsome face, which used to be frivolous, became a little calmer and a little more down and out. This kind of feeling shouldn't exist on Prince Ding's right-hand man, young Master Feng San, who was not the most powerful person in the Northwest, but no one dared to ignore him. At this moment he frowned slightly because of tiredness and worry, which made people unable to blame him. Yili quietly pulled Emo Xiaoyao's clothes, indicating that he shouldn't blame Feng Xiao too much. Emo Xiaoyao snorted with dissatisfaction, looked at Feng Xiao and said, "Tell me what's the matter. If you want to say that there's nothing wrong and that you just came to the Chu capital from the northwest because you're worried, I will immediately ask someone to pack you up and throw you back." Feng Xiao had grown up with him. Naturally, he could tell when he was really angry and when he was just trying to scare people. Smiling gratefully at Yi Li, Feng Xiao walked to a chair at the side and sat down. "Young Master Qingchen wants me to pass a message to Prince. The West Hill and Nanzhao haven't started fighting yet." In fact, this was a favor that Su Qingchen owed to Feng Xiao. Originally, this kind of news naturally didn't require Feng Xiao's status to send a letter from thousands of miles away. Moreover, it wasn't that Su Qingchen couldn't handle this kind of matter. However, Feng Xiao's condition had seriously affected his work efficiency. Young Master Qingchen was extremely intelligent. He naturally understood that there must be something in the capital that made him uneasy. She looked at Feng Xiao and said seriously, "Don't worry. She is the empress of a country and has the support of the Hua family. No matter who ascends the throne, they will only be respectful to her." Feng Xiao's expression froze. He hesitated a moment and said, "I want to see her. Wang Fei, please grant me this wish." Yi Li tilted her head to look at Emo Xiaoyao. Emo Xiaoyao raised an eyebrow and said, "Let Li decide such a small matter." Yi Li thought and then said to Feng Xiao, "Right now the palace is under martial law. Don't be impatient. I will have someone arrange it, but I need to get her agreement first." Yi Li knew what Feng Xiao wanted to do, but if the empress didn't agree, Feng Xiao's rash visit would only add to the troubles of both sides. Yi Li wasn't sure if the empress had feelings for Feng Xiao, or if the feelings were enough for her to give up her responsibility and status. Feng Xiao hesitated and wanted to refute, but seeing Yi Li's serious expression he could only nod. "Many thanks, Wang Fei." As though she saw Feng Xiao's unwillingness, Yi Li sighed softly and said, "It is hard to say who is right and who is wrong in matters of the heart. We all know that you care for her, but if she doesn't need your care, then your thoughts right now are not helping her but creating trouble for her. Do you understand?" Feng Xiao was silent. Maybe in his heart he didn't believe that the empress didn't need his help at all. But she was the mother of the world. Even if she didn't have any feelings for Emo Jingqi, it didn't change the fact that she was the future Empress Dowager of Dechu State. Even if Emo Jingli ascended the throne, he could only be respectful to this imperial sister-in-law. Right now, the 10th prince who was about to ascend the throne was only 7 years old. This was the time when he needed someone to help him. Would she go with him? In this moment, Feng Xiao suddenly became fearful and uneasy. Seeing his rare expression, Yi Li sighed softly in her heart. Love was the most torturous thing. Feng Xiao was a free and easy person with extraordinary achievements. She should have lived a carefree and unrestrained life, but unfortunately she fell for the word of love. How many years had he been obsessed? If Han Mingyue's obsession with Su Zuodi was hateful, then Feng Xiao's deep feelings for the empress could only make people feel pity and helpless. "Don't think too much." Yi Li laughed softly. Feng Xiao forced a smile and said, "Thank you, princess, for your advice. Prince, Princess, second young Master Leng and Madame Leng are here." Zhuo Jing reported from outside the door. Emo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and said, "What are they doing here at this time?" Leng Haoyu's laughter came from outside the door. With the emperor's death, many businesses were forced to close. Isn't this subordinate idle? Leng Haoyu had many businesses under his name, including brothels, taverns, gambling houses and so on. With the emperor's death, the world mourned. Naturally, these businesses could no longer be done. So Leng Haoyu brought his son and wife to the Prince Ding mansion to visit. He pulled Murong Ting into the study and happened to see Feng Xiao sitting on the side. Leng Haoyu smiled and said, "Oh? Isn't this young Master Feng-san? I haven't seen you for a long time. You don't look very good. Wasn't that so?" Feng Xiao rushed all the way here and didn't rest. He went straight into the study to discuss matters. When he was in good spirits he looked fine. Now that he was relaxed, even his red clothes looked a little dull. Although Leng Haoyu always liked to argue with Feng Xiao, he still had a sense of propriety and didn't poke at his sore spot. He sat down and looked at Feng Jiao and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, she's fine. At this time no one dares to neglect her." Before the new emperor was elected, the previous emperor had passed away. The Empress Dowager Noble Consort Lu was buried with the emperor. In the palace, the empress had the final say. At this time no one with eyes would make the empress uncomfortable. Feng Jiao nodded and said with a faint smile, "Thank you." Leng Haoyu curled his lips and didn't say anything. He didn't have any opinions about the empress, but seeing Feng Jiao's more than 10 years of bitter love, sometimes he couldn't help but want to fight for justice for his good friend. But thinking about how much time and effort he had spent chasing his wife, he could only sigh that Feng Jiao was more unlucky than him. Chapter 601. Leng Haoyu and Murong Ting's sudden visit was naturally not just for a visit. After everyone sat down, Leng Haoyu frowned and said, "Our people sent out news that the Lu family seems to know about Emo Jingli's son." Feng Jiao had just returned to Chu capital, so he naturally did not know what had happened in Chu capital in the past 2 months. He asked in confusion, "Emo Jingli's son? Is it the one Ying gave birth to? Was he kidnapped?" Leng Haoyu clapped his hands and smiled, "Your news is really too slow. Emo Jingli had just become the regent some time ago. When he returned to his residence, he kicked his own son to death." Although this news was suppressed and not spread, most of the nobles in the capital knew about it. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. He was not an idiot and naturally understood immediately. He smiled and said, "So? Emo Jingli raised someone else's son for nothing? What about now? His son is in the hands of the Lu family? Li, what do you think?" Emo Shuyao looked at Yi Li and asked. Yi Li frowned and thought for a while. "I don't think it's very likely. Emo Jingqi is very careful and suspicious. He never even trusts the people around him. Emo Jingli spent so much time and effort and still couldn't find any clues. This proves that Emo Jingqi dealt with it very cleanly back then. It doesn't make sense that the Lu family could find it. Also, the timing is a bit too coincidental. Emo Jingqi had just passed away, and the new emperor had not ascended the throne yet, but the Lu family had already thrown out the news of the Li Palace's only son. It really made people think too much." Emo Shuyao looked at Leng Haoyu. Leng Haoyu shrugged and said, "They also didn't get any specific news. It's just that the Lu family has been secretly moving a lot recently. They can only vaguely know that it's related to Emo Jingli's son. But it still needs time to confirm whether that child is Emo Jingli's son." Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled, "There's no need to investigate. It's a waste of time." Leng Haoyu looked at him in confusion. Emo Shuyao asked, "Does it matter if it is or not?" Hearing this, everyone was startled. Wasn't it? They did not intend to get involved in these matters. Then whether that child was Emo Jingli's son or not had no meaning to them. Emo Shuyao stood up and looked at Leng Haoyu with a smile. "If you have the time, why don't you investigate the matters of the northern region? Your business in the capital has also closed. Why don't you make a trip there? There was a battle in the city was in the capital city pass. Although there were secret guards protecting him, he was still worried about Leng Huai's secret guard." "I'll go too," Murong Ting quickly said. Although to Haoyu, S2, was not was to Haoto's family to the family to him to the family to be, to Emo Shuyao naturally could not control Murong Ting. This was Leng Haoyu's family background. Leng Haoyu said hesitantly, "Haoyu is in the middle of a battle now. It's too dangerous." Murong Ting snorted, "Do you think I haven't seen a battlefield?" She had grown up at the border with her father since she was young. Furthermore, she had participated in the defense of Yonglin City back then, okay? Junhan has no one to take care of her in the capital. Do you have the heart? Leng Haoyu continued to persuade. Murong Ting frowned. This was a problem. Her son had never left her side since he was born. Glancing at Yi Li sitting on the side, Murong Ting's eyes lit up. She looked at Yi Li eagerly. Yi Li covered her mouth and smiled. "As long as you're not afraid of Junhan being bullied by Chen, just send her over." Taking care of one child was the same as taking care of 2 children. Besides, although Emo Xiaobao was occasionally clingy, he was actually quite good at taking care of himself. They did not need to spend much effort on him. However, for some reason Emo Xiaobao thought that Ling Junhan was a soft little bun that could be bullied. Every time they met, it was either pinching or caressing. Yili suspected that Mo Xiaobao had transferred all his resentment from being bullied by his father to Lung Junhan. Every time she saw the white and soft little Junhan being bullied by Mo Xiaobao until tears welled up in her eyes but stubbornly refused to fall down, Yili's heart ached. However, Lung Junhan thought that Mo Xiaobao was a good brother. After being bullied, she would forget about it. The next time they met, she would still call brother Yuchen intimately. No wonder Mo Xiaobao called him little dazed Lung. Even Lung Haoyu, the father, could not help but cover his face when he saw that adorable look. How many sins did he commit to have such a dazed son? It's okay. Junhan has been spoiled too much by us. I don't know who she got her soft personality from. She can be placed in your house to help me train her well. Murong Ting waved her hand generously. The grand seat had made up her mind. As a slave to his wife, Lung Haoyu could only obey. However, he still had a bit of awareness as a father. He looked at Mo Xiuyao and warned, "Don't let the little heir bully my son too much." Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows. Was this something he could control? He was Prince Ding, not a nanny to take care of a child. Lung heir, you don't think that I asked you to visit your family, do you? Looking at Lung Haoyu's conflicted look, Mo Xiuyao said lightly. As an outstanding and capable subordinate, shouldn't he try to figure out every action and decision of his superior? Lung Haoyu was rushing to visit his family. Why was he so happy and worried that he could not bear to part with the child at home? Lung Haoyu lowered his head helplessly. He knew that it would not be so easy. I respectfully listened to Prince's instructions. Mo Xiuyao curled his lips slightly and said, "There's no need for instructions. If the Northern Army takes a step into Redbud Pass within half a year, you don't have to come back. Go hang yourself in the southeast. In addition, I am a person who appreciates talent." Lung Haoyu's expression changed. He looked at Mo Xiuyao with some joy. Mo Xiuyao smiled but did not say anything. Lung Haoyu raised his voice and said, "Prince, don't worry. This subordinate will live up to Prince's painstaking efforts. Go. Your son doesn't have to worry. If he can't make it back in time, I can bring him back to the northwest. It just so happens that Mr. Qing Yun is free now. He can teach you a thing or two." Lung Haoyu and Murong Ting were delighted. Ever since they had a child, they had always been stationed in the capital. In fact, this did not benefit Lung Haoyu's many subordinates, but he was worried about letting Murong Ting take care of the child alone. If Lung Junhan was brought back to the northwest, there was naturally no need to worry about her safety. Being taught by Mr. Qing Yun personally was definitely a benefit that others could not ask for. Second young Master Lung obviously attributed young Master Mo's cleverness and wisdom to Mr. Qing Yun's teaching. "Thank you, Prince." The next morning, Lung Haoyu and Murong Ting secretly went to Redbud Pass. The two of them were not valued in the Lung family, and not many people paid attention to them in the capital. Therefore they did not attract much attention. Lung Junhan was sent to the Prince Ding mansion that night. Although she was a little hurt about leaving her parents, the 4-year-old baby was only a little. But after hearing the news that she would live with brother Xiaobao in the future, little dazed Lung quickly forgot about her parents' departure and said that she would sleep with brother Yuchen in the future. Looking at his son's rare expression as if he had swallowed a fly, Prince Ding happily agreed to little Lung's request. He also signaled little treasure Mo to take good care of his little brother and not let him suffer the slightest grievance. Chapter 602. Thus, the days in the Prince Ding mansion slowly passed as Mo Xiaobao and Lung Xiaobao chased each other around, bullied each other and laughed foolishly. As for the news that came from time to time, such as the attempted assassination of the 10th prince before he ascended the throne, the Empress Dowager who did not want to be buried with him, and the secret clashes between the Lu family and the Li palace, these were all ignored by the people in the Prince Ding mansion. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the new emperor's ascension. Mo Jingqi's coffin had been moved to a side hall on the western side of the imperial city. Perhaps because Mo Jingqi never thought that he would die so early, Mo Jingqi's imperial mausoleum had not been completed yet. The time needed to build the imperial mausoleums could not be completed in a day. Therefore, Mo Jingqi could not be buried in a short period of time, and could only be placed in a palace for the time being. After the imperial mausoleum was completed, Zigong would be sent to the imperial mausoleum. The ascension of a new emperor in the Dechu state was always met with congratulations from all sides. Even when Mo Jingqi ascended the throne, the regent Mo Lufeng had already passed away. The Dechu state still had Mo Xiuan supporting it and the famous young general Mo Xiuyao. The entire Dechu state was still relatively stable and strong. The surrounding countries, including Xiling, naturally sent envoys to congratulate him. This time, other than Nanzhao and the surrounding small countries sending envoys, there was no news from the neighboring Xiling and northern tribes. A 7-year-old emperor, and there were 2 opposing factions in court, each with their own thoughts. The Prince Ding mansion had already left the Dechu state. The 2 powerful countries, Xiling and northern tribes, did have the right to ignore them. Moreover, they were not in the mood to congratulate the new emperor of the Dechu state. They were coveting the fat piece of meat that was the Dechu state. The enthronement ceremony of the 10th prince was scheduled to be held on March 12th, which was not a bad day. The Prince Ding mansion naturally received an invitation early on. A few days before the coronation, Yili was invited to the palace by the empress. This was not the first time Yili had seen the 10th prince. This child, who had originally lived like a shadow in a corner of the imperial palace, had suddenly been pushed to the most eye-catching place after Mo Jingqi's incident. In the past half a month he had suffered a lot of fright. When Yili saw him, he was sleeping in his biological mother's arms. Just by looking at his sallow and emaciated face, one could tell that he had not been living well these days. Hearing Yili's footsteps, the 10th prince immediately opened his eyes. His blank eyes were filled with horror and fear. He whimpered and was about to cry. His birth mother hurriedly covered his mouth in panic and looked at Yili and the empress at a loss. The empress frowned and sighed helplessly, quickly let go of him. Princess Ding will not bicker with a child. The woman, who was wearing gorgeous clothes and had an ordinary appearance, finally carefully let go of the hand covering the 10th prince's mouth. She looked uneasily at Yili before softly coaxing the 10th prince in her arms. The 10th prince cried for a while and seemed to be tired. He then fell into a deep sleep again. The empress wanted someone to take him to rest, but was worried that she would wake him up again. Yili walked over and pressed on the 10th prince's acupuncture points a few times before saying in a low voice, "Take him to rest. Be careful, he won't wake up." "Many thanks. Many thanks to Princess Ding." He thanked Yili with trepidation before taking the 10th prince into the back hall to rest. Seeing them leave, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked the empress, "What happened?" The empress smiled bitterly. "What else could it be? This child. At first I only thought that the 6th prince was arrogant and overbearing. He was spoiled and could not be a ruler. But this 10th prince. I am afraid that he is more troublesome than the 6th prince. It is also difficult for this child. He has only seen his father a few times in his life. His birth mother is also not someone who can teach him. He has been frightened a lot these days and has not been able to sleep well. Now, not to mention anything else, I am afraid that he will not even be able to cope on the day of the ascension." Seeing the empress' tired expression, Yili could only sigh. The 10th prince's birth mother was only a palace maid that Mo Jingqi had taken care of. She was originally from a poor peasant family and naturally could not teach the 10th prince anything. Although it was thought that because the 10th prince was about to ascend the throne, the people in the palace respectfully called her Empress Dowager. But that gorgeous dress could not change a person's temperament and ability. Wearing the gorgeous Empress Dowager's phoenix robe, it only made the small and unremarkable woman even more insignificant and uneasy. Right now, King Li and the officials of Hua country were supporting the outside matters, but the empress had to take care of the matters in the palace alone. If something happened to the new emperor at this time, even if the empress was not blamed, she would not be able to escape the crime of failing to protect the young emperor. No wonder the empress was so tired. Seeing the empress like this, Yili almost could not bear to talk about Feng Jiao. The empress saw that Yili was distracted and said with a smile, "Do you have something to say? We are not outsiders, just say it." Yili looked up and said in a low voice to her, "Feng San has returned." The empress stilled and looked down at the white jade bracelet on her wrist in a daze. Yili did not rush her and quietly sat at the side to drink tea. After a while, the empress came back to her senses and smiled apologetically at Yili, saying, "I have let you see a joke for a while. Isn't he fine in the northwest? Why did he come back at this time?" Yili looked calmly at the empress and did not speak. The faint smile on the empress' face also gradually disappeared. Looking helplessly at Yili, she said, "For Wang Fei to come and tell me this, it must be." Wang Fei also knows about the matters of the past. Yili nodded and said softly, the matters of the past are not your fault. Feng San's unwillingness to give up is his obsession, and it is also not your fault. If your highness does not care, I will tell him not to disturb your highness. But if your highness is not indifferent, why not give each other a chance? Chance? The empress smiled bitterly and shook her head at Yili, saying, many thanks to Wang Fei. I know that Wang Fei is not someone who likes to meddle in other people's business. It is not easy for you to tell me so much. Wang Fei, please tell him. I only treat him like Xuyao, a younger brother that I watched grow up. There is nothing else. Yili frowned and said, he wants to see your highness. Originally, he wanted to enter the palace as soon as he returned to the capital, but the prince and I persuaded him not to. But if I bring back such an answer, I'm afraid that he will not be convinced no matter what. When the time comes, he still wants to see your highness. The empress shook her head and said, there is no need to meet. Right now, the palace is heavily guarded and the new emperor is about to ascend the throne. I do not have the mind to think about these things. Wang Fei, tell him not to enter the palace. I do not have the time. Yili was silent. Not having the time was indeed a very good excuse to refuse. When a person did not even have the time to see you, it was naturally enough to show that they did not care about you. No matter from which aspect, the empress was an extremely intelligent woman. What plans does your highness have in the future? Yili asked with a frown. The empress was puzzled and looked at Yili. Yili pursed her lips and said with a faint smile, if your highness wants me to persuade Feng San, you have to give me a reason. At least, you have to let him know that without him your highness can live very well or even better than with him, right? The empress understood and said in a low voice, when the new emperor ascends the throne, I will become the empress dowager of the Dechu state. Is that not enough? Maybe it is. Yili sighed and said. The two were speechless for a while. There was a commotion outside the door. Impudent. Have the empress come out. Aijia wants to see her. Empress Dowager, the empress is currently meeting with Princess Ding. Chapter 603. Imperial Mother, what is the matter? Seeing the Empress Dowager come in with a group of people, the Empress frowned and asked. The Empress Dowager fiercely stared at the Empress and snapped, where is the 10th prince? The Empress calmly looked at the Empress Dowager and asked, the 10th prince? Imperial Mother, why are you asking this? The Empress Dowager coldly snorted, the 10th prince is about to ascend the throne. Aijia is his imperial grandmother. If I don't teach him, who else can? The Empress calmly refused. The new emperor has his tutor and court officials to teach him. Imperial Mother doesn't need to worry. Besides, the new emperor hasn't been registered yet. Imperial Mother is going to be buried with Imperial Father. It's not appropriate to meet. It was clear that the Empress Dowager had really angered the Empress these days. Otherwise, the Empress would never have said such a thing with her temperament. The Empress Dowager was so angry that her face turned green and white. Her hand trembled as she pointed at the Empress. Presumptuous. Huasher, even though you are the Empress, you didn't leave behind a prince for the Emperor. Aijia thinks that the person who should be buried with him is you. The Empress Dowager was very jealous of the leisurely and graceful Empress in front of her. Even though the Empress didn't have a son, and even her only daughter was missing. But on the surface no one could touch her. Not only because she was the daughter of the Hua family, but also because she was the emperor's first wife. She was the D-Empress of the Dechu state and the D-Mother of all the princes and princesses. No matter which prince ascended the throne, they had to respect her as the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager had to admit that even though she looked down on and hated noble consort Lu, she was the same as noble consort Lu. No matter how favored she was, no matter how many children she had. Without the title of the D-Wife, they didn't even have the right to refuse to be buried with the emperor. The Empress lowered her eyes and calmly said, it's a pity that the emperor didn't want I to accompany him before he died. Imperial Mother, Qinxia thinks that you should go back to the palace to rest. There are many things that Qinxia can't decide. Even the new emperor can't decide at this time. If Imperial Mother has something to say, it's better to go find Li Wang. The Empress Dowager gritted her teeth. Of course she wanted to find Mo Jingli. However, ever since the emperor passed away, Mo Jingli had never entered the palace to pay his respects to her. Even when he occasionally entered the palace, It was to visit the Empress and discuss the ascension of the new emperor. By the time she received the news and rushed over, Mo Jingli had already left the palace. Now that the Empress Dowager's power had been stripped clean, it was very inconvenient for her to do anything. The Empress Dowager knew that Mo Jingli was determined to leave her alone. "Empress, what are you talking about? I just came to see the 10th prince." The Empress Dowager held back her anger and gritted her teeth. Since Imperial Grandmother wanted to see her grandson, she naturally had to let her see him. It just so happened that the 10th prince had also woken up. The Empress could only send someone to invite the 10th prince out. After the Empress gave in, the Empress Dowager sat down with satisfaction and drank the tea brought by the palace maid. Only then did he have the time to see Yi Li sitting beside him. The Empress Dowager didn't have a good impression of Yi Li. It wasn't that she had any opinions about Yi Li. It was that they had different standpoints from the start. And now her life was hanging by a thread, while Yi Li had become Prince Ding's only wife. Princess Ding's name was as famous as Prince Ding's. How could the Empress Dowager, who had always boasted of being a heroine, feel comfortable? "Princess Ding?" the Empress Dowager said with a frown. "Yes." "Greetings, Empress Dowager." Yi Li put down the teacup and gave a faint smile. She was sitting leisurely in the chair to the left of the Empress. She didn't look like a heroine whose name shook the world, but rather like an elegant and quiet lady. The Empress Dowager knew that there was nothing she could say to Yi Li, so she gave a soft snort and said no more. After a while, the 10th prince walked out after tidying up his clothes. Following behind him was naturally his birth mother. The 10th prince's birth mother's surname was Li. After giving birth to the 10th prince, she was titled Noble Lady Li. Now, everyone in the palace called her Imperial Concubine Li. Perhaps it was because she had been lowly since she was young, but she suddenly became the noblest woman in the world. Li Shi's fear and uneasiness were no less than the 10th prince's, so she would often act in a panic and tremble like a frightened bird. This kind of pettiness naturally couldn't enter the Empress Dowager's eyes. Looking at the trembling mother and son in front of her, the Empress Dowager gave a displeased snort. Li Shi jumped in fright and fell to her knees on the ground. This servant greets Empress Dowager." Li Shi had only seen the Empress Dowager a few times before, and she had only kowtowed from a distance. The Empress Dowager's status was noble, so she naturally wasn't someone a low-ranking concubine like her could come into contact with. When she suddenly heard the Empress Dowager's cold snort, she unconsciously knelt down. The Empress frowned in displeasure, but she was also very helpless. Li Shi's cowardice couldn't be blamed on her, but the new emperor's birth mother being so unpresentable was really a headache. When the 10th prince saw his mother suddenly kneel, he was also frightened and wanted to kneel as well. A lily-white hand gently supported his arm. Even if it was a woman's hand, the strength was not something a 7-year-old child could contend against. The 10th prince naturally couldn't continue kneeling. He couldn't help but look in panic at the person holding him. Yi Li sat in the chair and looked with a smile at the frightened child in front of her. She smiled slightly and said, "A man has gold under his knees. As a man you can't casually kneel." The child, who had tears in his eyes and wanted to cry, stared blankly at the woman with a gentle smile in front of him. For a moment he forgot to cry. He only felt that the blue-clothed woman in front of him was very gentle and kind. She made him feel more comfortable and at ease than staying by his mother's side. It seemed that his frightened heart gradually calmed down and he couldn't help but quietly lean toward Yi Li. The Empress let out a sigh of relief. She looked at Li Shi and said, "Younger sister, what are you doing? Why aren't you getting up? Hurry up and help Nyang Li up." The palace maids serving around them quickly helped Li Shi up and sat down in a chair on the side. Li Shi looked uneasily at the Empress and Empress Dowager. Then she looked at Yi Li, who was smiling at her son. She helplessly twisted the corners of her gorgeous gold-embroidered clothes. At this time the Empress Dowager's face had already sunk. She slammed the table and said sternly, "Princess Ding, what do you mean by this? Aijia is the 10th prince's grandmother. Could it be that Aijia can't accept this bow?" Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. She lowered her head and comforted the frightened 10th prince. The Empress calmly said, Mother, are you sure you want to accept this bow?" Although the 10th prince hadn't officially ascended the throne, from the moment the edict was issued, he was already the emperor of the Dechu state. As the emperor, even if it was his mother, he didn't need to bow. Moreover, was that bow just now? It was clearly the 10th prince and Li Shi kneeling because they were scared by the Empress Dowager. If he really knelt down, he would become a huge laughingstock. The Empress Dowager suppressed her anger and squeezed out a smile at the 10th prince, saying, Su-yun, come here and let Imperial Grandmother take a look. The 10th prince had never seen an Imperial Grandmother. He only felt that the fierce old woman in front of him was very terrifying. He quickly hid behind Yili. The Empress Dowager's eyes darkened, but she didn't get angry. She took out a jade pendant and shook it, saying, Come, let Imperial Grandmother take a look. This is Imperial Grandmother's gift to you. Chapter 604. The 10th prince looked hesitantly at the jade pendant and turned to look at the Empress. The Empress was drinking tea with her head lowered. But he looked at his Mufei Li Shi, who was still wringing her clothes helplessly. How could she have the energy to care about him? In the end, he could only look at Yili. Yili laughed softly. Do you like it? If you like it, then take it. Remember to thank Imperial Grandmother. Grandson thanks. Imperial Grandmother. The 10th prince took the jade pendant and said thank you to Imperial Grandmother before hiding behind Yili again. The Empress Dowager, who had just put on a kind face and wanted to talk to him, grabbed empty air. Her face twisted again. The Empress saw this and controlled herself. Before the Empress Dowager got angry, she said lightly, the 10th prince was frightened yesterday. If Imperial Mother is concerned about him, it is better to see him another day. The Empress Dowager had no choice but to leave angrily. Watching the Empress Dowager leave, Yili raised her eyebrows and asked with a smile, What happened to the Empress Dowager? Was she so frightened by the decree that she forgot to bring her brain out? Seeing the Empress Dowager like this, Yili was really not used to it. In the past, even if the Empress Dowager was not unfathomable in her eyes, she still had some tricks up her sleeve. But to break into the Empress Palace like today and scare the new emperor who had not yet ascended the throne, it was simply a lowly trick. The Empress smiled and said, the Empress Dowager was forced to lose her sense of propriety. After all, who would not panic when it comes to matters of life and death? Yili frowned and said, What about Li Wang? Does Li Wang really not care about the Empress Dowager? The Empress shook her head and said, I also don't understand the matter between mother and son. For example, she never understood whether the Empress Dowager loved her two sons or which son she loved more. And Li Wang and Mo Jingqi, the two brothers Mo Jingqi, hated their own mother to the point of being unreasonable. This child is called Mo Su-yun? Yili looked down at the timid 10th prince hiding beside her and asked. The name is not bad. In fact, Mo Jingqi's son's name was not suitable. The name of the founding Prince Ding was Mo Lanyun. Although no one stipulated that the royal family had to avoid mentioning the prince's name, such a name still made people feel a little uncomfortable. The Empress looked at the 10th prince, and a trace of affection flashed in her eyes. She said, It was the people of the imperial astronomer who obtained it. Mo Jingqi had never taken this pair of mother and son seriously. Naturally, they couldn't expect him to personally come up with a name. Yili looked at the pitiful child in front of her with some amusement. This child's courage was a little too small. Of course, it could also be because he had been frightened these days. Although Xiaobao bullied Ling Junhan every day and called her Little Days Lung, Ling Junhan was more than 10 times smarter and bolder than the child in front of her. No wonder the Empress was so worried. As an emperor, it was no good to be bold and spoiled like Mo Ruiyun, but it was even more unacceptable to be scared to tears like the 10th prince, who might even sit on the throne. The former was barely able to keep up appearances, while the latter couldn't even keep up appearances. Looking at the 10th prince, the Empress sighed. Wearily she said, Great elder princess and the courtiers have handed him over to I, but how could I have the patience to change a child's temperament? This child has truly been taught to be too cowardly and timid. Yili smiled and said, Princess Changle has been taught by your Imperial Highness to be intelligent and generous. Given time, the 10th prince will be better. The Empress smiled bitterly. How can there be time? He can't even deal with the present. If the 10th prince really insists on not attending the ascension ceremony, then even if the Prince of Li and the Lu family propose to appoint a new emperor, it won't be unreasonable. At that time, what the Empress didn't say was that at that time, this child and Madame Li wouldn't be able to survive. Regardless of which side gained the upper hand in the end, They would absolutely not allow the most legitimate heir to the throne to live in this world. Then your Imperial Highness's meaning is? Yili looked at the Empress and asked softly. She didn't believe that the Empress didn't know that this was her best chance to escape. The chaos in the Chu Palace and the foreseeable future was not a problem that could be completely resolved by supporting a new emperor. The Empress sighed and said, "Let's take it one step at a time." Yili shook her head and sighed. "Why bother, Your Imperial Highness? Could it be that Your Imperial Highness really doesn't want to see Wuyo again one day?" The Empress's expression dimmed. Hearing Yili's words, she was slightly distracted. The Empress lowered her head and pondered. Yili didn't disturb her. Smiling, she looked at the 10th prince and asked, "Little Imperial Highness, how old are you?" The 10th prince blinked his eyes. Looking at the gentle and amiable elder sister before him, he timidly replied, 7 years old. His soft, childlike voice caused Yili to sigh. Her Xiaobao's speech had been very smooth. From the beginning, his voice had been very crisp and clear. She had never heard such a soft, childlike voice. It was truly a pity that such an adorable child had been pushed to such a position in the imperial palace. "Little Imperial Highness, have you been afraid these days?" The 10th prince's small body trembled. His face revealed a frightened expression. Clearly he thought of what had happened these days. His eyes immediately filled with tears. Looking at Yili and nodding, Yili sighed and hugged his small body. She said, "Don't be afraid. There are many people who will protect Little Imperial Highness, do you know? In the future, Little Imperial Highness will become the Emperor of the Dechu state. Do you know what an emperor is?" The 10th prince raised his head and looked at Yili. "I know. It's someone like Imperial Father." "Your Imperial Father is not worth emulating. However, you also saw that your Imperial Father is very powerful, right? Everyone is afraid of him." The 10th prince nodded. Yili continued to smile and said, "So Little Imperial Highness, you will become the new emperor of the Dechu state. In the future, everyone will be afraid of you. So you don't need to be afraid of them. They won't dare to harm you." The 10th prince's voice carried a sobbing tone. But Wu, yesterday Wu Xiyun was afraid." Yili hurriedly patted the 10th prince and softly coaxed him. Actually, she was not good at coaxing children. Mo Xiaobao did not need anyone to coax him. Leng Junhan, who was temporarily living in the Prince Ding mansion, was also a good child. "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Little Imperial Highness, you have to be brave. A brave child doesn't need to be afraid of anything. Only then will others not dare to bully you, do you know?" Perhaps Yili's comforting words were useful. Or perhaps it was purely Yili's voice that made the child feel at ease. The 10th prince gradually stopped crying. He looked at Yili and said, "Elder sister. Will elder sister accompany Xiyun?" Yili helplessly smiled bitterly. She could not accompany him. On the contrary, if this child really became an independent and outstanding prince in the future, they might even become enemies. However, looking at this soft and pitiful 7-year-old child in front of her, who could really harden her heart and ignore him. "I didn't expect you to be so good at coaxing children." The Empress had already returned to her senses. She only felt that it was very interesting to see Yili and the 10th prince communicating, so she just watched from the side. Looking at Yili, the Empress smiled and said, "Speaking of which, this child is very timid. This is the first time he trusts someone he has just met so much. Even though I have seen him so many times, he usually just salutes properly." Yili smiled and said, "It's probably because I have been taking care of children when I moved in, so I have more affinity with children." The Empress only thought that she was talking about Mo Xiaobao. She smiled and said, "If this child has the courage and intelligence of little Shitzi, then I don't need to worry." Yili lowered her head and touched the head of the depressed child. The child, who was already 7 years old, was not really unable to understand anything. He could still understand the disappointment and worry in the adult's tone towards him. Chapter 605. In the Prince Ding mansion, he heard the words that Yili brought back. Feng Jiao was silent for a long time, but he could not say anything. In this regard, Yili was powerless to help. From Feng Jiao's point of view, she could blame the Empress' stubbornness for delaying Feng Jiao. But this could not be blamed on the Empress. She had never given Feng Jiao any hope. What she was doing now was indeed the best that any woman in this era could do. Moreover, it was the best that an empress could do. Yili could not use her own standards to ask a woman who had been educated to be loyal to the monarch. Shuyao Feng-san? Yili asked worriedly. Emo Shuyao raised his head from the book in his hand, saying, "Don't worry about him, he knows his limits." Seeing Emo Shuyao like this, Yili shook her head and threw this matter to the back of her mind. She told Emo Shuyao about seeing the 10th prince in the palace and finally sighed, "That child is too worried and timid." I don't know what Emo Jingqi was thinking when he left behind the edict. Emo Shuyao put down the book and walked behind Yili. He hugged her from behind, letting her lean on him, and said softly, "This is between Emo Jingli and other people, it has nothing to do with us. Li, why do you need to copy hearts for them?" Yili smiled and shook her head, saying, "I'm not copying hearts for them, it's just that." It was just that looking at the ignorant child who was destined to be sacrificed, she could not bear it. That child was only a little older than Emo Xiaobao. Maybe it was because she was a mother, her heart was softer than before. Emo Shuyao said softly, "Although the capital is under martial law right now, no one dares to stop the people of the Prince Ding mansion. If Li feels bored, you can walk around, you don't have to worry about the trivial matters in the palace." Yili nodded and said, "I understand." Understanding that Emo Shuyao didn't want her to worry about those trivial matters, Yili naturally agreed. They were a family. As for the others, no matter how pitiful they were still outsiders. She didn't want Emo Shuyao to worry about her. Mother. Emo Xiaobao's voice passed through the long corridor, cheerfully rushing over. Emo Shuyao frowned unhappily, looking up at Emo Xiaobao, who had already run to the door and was about to enter. Behind Emo Xiaobao was Ling Junhan, who was panting. Yili said helplessly, "Chin, walk slowly. Look at how tired Junhan is." Emo Xiaobao looked back at Yili, who was still panting but smiling at him. He snorted softly and snuggled into Yili's arms. Yili looked down at his annoyed little face and couldn't help chuckling. She patted Emo Xiaobao and said, "Junhan is younger than you. You are the older brother, so you have to take care of her. Do you understand?" "I understand," Emo Xiaobao whispered. She looked up at Ling Junhan and said, "Little dummy Ling, if you can't walk, just tell me." Seeing Yili and Emo Shuyao walk in hand, he hurriedly stood to greet them. "Prince Wang Fei." Emo Shuyao raised a hand to support Duke Hua. He said in a rare gentle voice, "Duke, why are you here so early? Is something the matter?" Duke Hua sighed and said with a bitter smile, "Isn't something big happening? Otherwise, why would this old man be so insensible as to come here so early in the morning?" The two of them helped Duke Hua sit down on either side before taking their own seats. Yili smiled faintly. "Old Duke, what are you saying? We'll always welcome you whenever you come to visit us. You haven't said what happened yet." "What happened?" Duke Hua was not in the mood to be courteous. He said in a low voice, "The Empress is missing." Although they already knew that Duke Hua would come here for this matter, they still didn't know how to say it. After a while, Yili slowly opened her mouth and said, "Old Duke. Her Majesty the Empress is in Ding Wang Fu." Chapter 607. Hearing Yili's words, Duke Hua was stunned at first. He clearly didn't know how to react. Emo Shuyao didn't say anything either. He held his teacup and calmly waited for Duke Hua's reaction. After a long time, Duke Hua finally came back to his senses. He looked at the two calm people in front of him and said, "What's going on, Prince?" Emo Shuyao put down his teacup and looked at Duke Hua apologetically. "This happened so suddenly that I didn't inform you. I'm really sorry." Duke Hua finally reacted after a long time. He sighed and glared at Emo Shuyao unhappily. "Who wants you to apologize? I just want to ask why you brought the Empress to the Prince Ding mansion for no reason. Does the prince think that there aren't enough people watching the Prince Ding mansion?" Hearing this, Yili smiled faintly. "I'm sorry for making you worry. It's true that we're young and inexperienced. We were impulsive." Duke Hua sighed and looked at Yili. "The prince and the princess aren't impulsive people. I won't ask why. Ask the Empress to come out. I'll try to send her back to the palace." Yili and Emo Shuyao looked at each other. They didn't expect Duke Hua to let them take the Empress away with just a few words. However, since Feng Jiao had taken the risk to bring the Empress out, they couldn't let Duke Hua take the Empress away before they could be sure that Feng Jiao couldn't persuade the Empress. Emo Shuyao looked at Duke Hua and calmly said, That's why I said sorry to you, Duquois. I'm afraid I can't let you take the Empress back for now. Why is that? Duquois frowned and asked. The Empress being taken out of the palace by the Prince Ding mansion was really out of his expectations. The reason why he hurried to the Prince Ding mansion was because he wanted to use the Prince Ding mansion's power to investigate this matter. But he didn't expect such an outcome. Regardless of whether it was for his personal relationship with the Prince Ding mansion or for the relationship between the Dechu state and the Northwest, this matter could not be spread. Therefore, this decision could be said to be the best decision for everyone. He did not understand why Prince Ding and Wang Fei would object. Yili sighed helplessly. It seemed like Duquois didn't know about Feng Jiao. As a result, none of them knew what Duquois' reaction would be if he heard that it was Feng Jiao who took the initiative to kidnap the person. After thinking about it, Yili was about to say something when the Empress's voice came from the door. I've made father worry. I'll go back with you now. The three of them turned their heads to look outside the door. The Empress, who had taken off her large cloak, appeared at the door in her bright yellow phoenix robe. The expression on his face was indifferent and no one could tell what he was thinking. The Empress stepped into the hall and Feng Jiao followed her in. If it's possible, our Hua family won't be willing. This old man understands Prince's meaning, but the Empress's identity is different from others. If it's discovered that the Empress is in the Northwest, it will be a great blow to the Prince and the Prince Ding mansion's reputation. Back then, how could Duquois be willing to marry his daughter to Mo Jingqi, who was still a prince? The Hua family's wealth had reached its peak. As long as he was still alive, no matter who ascended the throne, they would leave some face for the Hua family. A prince's wife or even the Empress was never a good thing for the Hua family. Unfortunately, the late emperor was worried that the Hua family and the Prince Ding mansion were too close, so he forcefully tied the Hua family to the ship of Mo Jingqi, who was about to succeed the throne. If the emperor wanted his subjects to die, they had no choice but to die, let alone a mere arranged marriage. Duquois had always known of Feng Jiao's existence. However, he had never placed too much importance on Feng Jiao. It wasn't that he looked down on Feng Jiao, but Feng Jiao was, after all, several years younger than the Empress. When the Empress was married, Feng Jiao was still a half-grown child. Even if there was something going on, Duquois only treated it as a child's momentary infatuation. Thus, when Feng Jiao sneaked into Duquois' mansion on the night before the Empress's wedding, not only did he not make a move to capture him, he even allowed him to smoothly meet him. Otherwise, given that Feng Jiao was only 15 years old, how could it be so easy for him to break into the heavily guarded Duquois' mansion? Duquois naturally wouldn't say these things. He sized up the red-clothed man in front of him. Feng Jiao, who was already in his 30s, was no longer the thin youth who had left in the heavy rain. His handsome face now had a hint of calmness and elegance that hadn't been there in his youth. More importantly, Feng Jiao, who was the same age as Mo Xiuyao, didn't even have a concubine, let alone a wife. Duquois naturally knew why this was. No matter how one looked at it, Feng Jiao was undoubtedly the most satisfactory son-in-law candidate. It was just a pity. Sizing up the somewhat thin and haggard man who still couldn't hide his handsomeness, Duquois' eyes gradually turned into pity and helplessness. How can I rest assured that she will be alone outside? Duquois looked at the Empress, then at Feng Jiao, Mo Xiuyao and Yili. His snow-white brows were tightly furrowed. Before he could say anything, Zhuijing came in and reported, Prince Wang Fei, someone from Duquois' mansion is here. The Prince Regent wants to see the old Duke. Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and looked displeased. Mo Jingli is getting more and more arrogant. Duquois was not angry. He stood up and said, forget it. He was the Prince Regent personally appointed by the late Emperor. There is nothing wrong with summoning me. Sorry for disturbing Prince Wang Fei. I will take my leave now. With that he walked out of the door. The Empress also stood up and followed Duquois out. Seeing this, Feng Jiao wanted to stand up. However, he felt an invisible pressure on his face, making him unable to move. He could only watch as the Empress stood up and left. Duquois, who had walked to the door, suddenly turned around and looked at the Empress, saying, stay in Prince Ding mansion for a few days. I am not ready to send you back to the palace. Father. The Empress frowned and said worriedly. Duquois did not give her a chance to refute and said firmly, that's it. You don't have to send me back. Father, Seeing Du Hua leave, the empress wanted to follow, but she heard a pft behind her. Feng Jiao spat out a mouthful of blood. Ah Yao. The empress was shocked. Feng Jiao smiled at her with difficulty, but the blood on his lips kept falling. Countless dark red flowers bloomed on his originally red brocade clothes. The empress quickly went forward to support him. She glanced at Emo Xiao and said, "What happened? How did he get hurt so badly?" Emo Xiao did not care. He calmly drank his tea and said, "I didn't hit him hard last night. He didn't want to live anymore, right?" Last night, Emo Xiao did not hit him hard, so he added a bit of hidden energy. It was enough to force Feng Jiao to spit out blood, but not to the point of hurting him. "You." The empress frowned and glared at Feng Jiao with slight anger. Yili quickly said, "Empress, please help Feng San back to his room to rest. I'll have someone call a doctor over." Seeing Feng Jiao's face turn even paler after spitting out blood and his body on the verge of collapse, the empress did not care about anything else. She could only help Feng Jiao out, completely forgetting that they could call someone to help. Seeing the empress help Feng Jiao out with some difficulty, Yili asked her husband in confusion, "These two? Can they do it or not?" Emo Xiao raised an eyebrow and said, "How would I know this? Du Hua, I sent him away and kept the doctor for him. If Feng San still can't do anything, then let him die by himself. I'm not his father. I don't have to think for him." Yili angrily pinched him and sighed, "These two?" She shook her head and did not know what to say. In fact, she somewhat understood the empress's thoughts. Other than the responsibility of being the empress, the women of this era were still bound by the idea of not having a second husband. Perhaps it was not difficult for her to give up the position of empress, but it would be more difficult for her to accept Feng Jiao. Emo Xiao took her into his arms with a smile and said softly, "Don't worry. At least Feng Jiao should be able to persuade her to go to the northwest this time. After all, Chang'e is still in the northwest." Once the responsibility of being the empress was removed, Chang'e was definitely the most important person to the empress. As long as the empress still wanted to see her daughter, there was no need to worry that she would not leave. But how to make her accept Feng San really had nothing to do with him. He was the prince, not the Yulao. Yili thought that Emo Xiao's words made sense. Even if they were thinking for the empress, they should not interfere too much with her feelings. It was the empress's freedom to accept whoever she wanted. It could not be said that because Feng Jiao had done the most for her, the empress should accept Feng Jiao as a matter of course. And now it was much better than they had expected. At least Du Hua did not seem to want to take the empress back to the palace. As long as Du Hua did not object, the empress would have less resistance to leaving the capital. "Didn't you hit him too hard just now?" Yili thought of the blood that Feng Jiao spat out. It was real blood. It was not an act to deceive the empress. Emo Xiao said carelessly, "Feng San has been depressed these days. He was seriously injured last night. It was a good thing that he spat out the blood. Don't worry about it." "Really?" Yili was a bit doubtful. Was it really not because Feng Jiao caused so much trouble and Emo Xiao took the opportunity to take revenge? Deep in the prince's mansion, in the courtyard covered by green trees, the empress had already changed out of her gorgeous phoenix robe. The inconspicuous white robe made her look less noble and more beautiful. She also looked much younger. After sending away the doctor that had examined Feng Jiao, the empress held the prescription that the doctor had left behind. Her brows were tightly knit. She thought of how the doctor had said that Feng Jiao had been depressed for a long time and was afraid that it would harm his life. Turning back to look at the pale-faced man lying on the bed with a heavy shadow under his eyes, the empress' heart suddenly ached. In the end, she could only sigh and turn to find someone to boil the medicine. "Don't go." His clothes were pulled. Feng Jiao's voice was clearly weak. His eyes looking at the empress were filled with hope, sadness, and caution. The empress helplessly stood there for a while before finally giving in. She walked to the stool by the bed and sat down. At the palace entrance, Du Hua was about to leave the palace and return to his residence when he was stopped by someone behind him. Turning around, Du Hua looked at the unfamiliar palace maid in front of him and said calmly, "What is it?" The palace maid looked to be about 14 or 15 years old. Facing Du Hua, who had spent his entire life fighting, she still had some status. She lowered her head and hurriedly said, "The imperial consort invites old Duke for a chat." Du Hua coldly said, My Hua family has no relationship with the imperial consort. Presumably there is nothing to chat about. Moreover, these are troubled times. It is inconvenient for this old man to rashly enter the harem. The palace maid saw that he was about to leave and hurriedly said, "Old Duke, please wait." The imperial consort said, "It is about the Empress. Old Duke Hua, please go." Duke Hua's face darkened. He coldly glanced at the palace maid and said with his hands behind his back, "Young lady, please lead the way." Finally, she completed the imperial consort's order. The palace maid secretly let out a sigh of relief. She hurriedly turned around and led Duke Hua to see Imperial Consort Lu. The palace maid did not lead Duke Hua to the palace where Imperial Consort Lu lived. Instead, she led him to an inconspicuous and remote palace in the Imperial Palace. They did not meet anyone along the way. Duke Hua knew that Imperial Consort Lu was completely different from the Empress Dowager. Even now, Imperial Consort Lu still had deep connections and power in the Imperial Palace. In this case, Duke Hua's heart sank. If Imperial Consort Lu really knew the truth about the Empress' disappearance. Greetings, Imperial Consort. Imperial Consort Lu sat under the eaves of the palace that had been deserted for a long time. She still looked high and mighty like a fairy in the sky. Duke Hua had never liked Imperial Consort Lu. It was not because she was his daughter's rival in love. It was because when Imperial Consort Lu was still a young girl, she had a kind of indifference that came from her bones. It was as if no one in the world was worthy of her attention. He didn't know where Imperial Consort Lu got her arrogance from. She thought she was above all the other beauties in the world. However, that kind of arrogance made most people feel very uncomfortable. Therefore, Duke Hua had also noticed Imperial Consort Lu's feelings for Mo Xiaoyao. However, he had never thought highly of her. Prince Ding was a proud and arrogant young man. How could he take a fancy to such an arrogant woman no matter how beautiful she was? Chapter 610. You may rise, Duke Hua. Noble Consort Lu turned around and said indifferently. Duke Hua stood up and asked bluntly, "May I know why your majesty has summoned me here?" Noble Consort Lu smiled faintly and looked at Duke Hua, asking slowly, "Duke, how is the Empress?" Duke Hua narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Forgive me, I don't understand what you mean. If you really don't know, why did you come to see I?" Noble Consort Lu lowered her eyes and said, "If I don't have solid information, why did I invite you to see me? It's a coincidence. Last night, a girl from Ai's palace passed by the Imperial Garden and happened to see a person leaving the palace with something. She saw a corner of that thing. It seemed to be the phoenix brocade that only the Empress could wear. More coincidentally, the girl didn't know that person, but she described her to I had some impression of her." Duke Hua said coldly, "I don't know what you're talking about. If that's all you want to say, please forgive me for leaving." Duke Hua cupped his hands and turned to leave. Noble Consort Lu's cold eyes flashed and she sneered, "The Empress is now in the Prince Ding mansion, isn't she? It was Feng San who took the Empress away last night. Duke Hua, do you really not care at all?" Duke Hua turned around and sneered, "Since you're so confident, why don't you directly report it to King Li and the Empress Dowager? Instead of worrying about the Hua family and the Empress, why don't you worry about yourself, Noble Consort Lu? The late Emperor's edict is not so easy to change." Noble Consort Lu's face darkened. Duke Hua was warning her that if she interfered with the Empress's affairs, the Hua family had many ways to make the royal family carry out Mo Jingqi's edict immediately. In fact, it was not easy for Mo Jingqi's edict to be delayed until now. It was just that Mo Jingqi hadn't been buried yet and the new emperor hadn't ascended the throne. With the Lu family and King Li around, no one mentioned the burial for the time being. But it had already been announced to the world. Sooner or later, the idle scholars would definitely mention it. If the Hua family interfered, it would be even more difficult to handle. Noble Consort Lu watched as Duke Hua turned around and left. The peach blossom in her hand was crushed into pieces. The light red flower juice stained her jade-like hand. In the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao received a message from Duke Hua. He frowned and threw the letter on the table. Yili picked it up and looked at it. She frowned and said, "How did Noble Consort Lu know about this? To be able to kidnap the Empress out of the palace without a plan, do you expect him to have any rationality left?" It wasn't surprising that he was discovered. Besides, "I'm afraid Noble Consort Lu has an expert by her side," Mo Xiaoyao said. "Master?" Yili asked curiously. She couldn't imagine what kind of master noble consort Lu, who was born in the palace, would have. Could it be that the imperial palace was really full of crouching tigers and hidden dragons? Mo Xiuyao said calmly, "Noble consort Lu has always thought highly of herself. If it was a thesis, she might have a chance. But if it's a scheme, she's far from it. These things didn't seem to be her doing." Different from many noble ladies, noble consort Lu could be said to have been pampered all her life. She was born in the most powerful period of the Lu family. She was the only daughter of the same generation and was also very beautiful. At that time, the Lu family really doted on her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been raised to be so arrogant. After entering the palace, she was spoiled by Mo Jingqi without any principles. She didn't need to use her brain to scheme against others. Noble consort Lu, who was used to doing whatever she wanted, was indeed not very good at scheming. Otherwise, she wouldn't have aroused Mo Jingqi's suspicion when he was dying and failed. Yili didn't know noble consort Lu well, but after several confrontations, Yili could feel that noble consort Lu was not a scheming person. She could tell from the way she pestered Mo Xiuyao. Thinking about it, Yili asked, "Who do you suspect?" Mo Xiuyao smiled and simply said, "Tan Jiji." Tan Jiji? Yili paused. She hadn't mentioned this name for a long time. Since Shu Manlin was killed by Princess Anxi, Tan Jiji's whereabouts were unknown. After that, Ren Qining appeared, which made them shift their attention away from Tan Jiji. They didn't expect that Tan Jiji would sneak back to the capital. Mo Xiuyao said, "Tan Jiji quietly stayed by Mo Jingqi's side for 10 years. Since he wasn't sincerely loyal to Mo Jingqi, he couldn't have done nothing in the past 10 years, right? So I guess he not only knows Su Zuidi and noble consort Lu, but also knows Mo Jingli." Hearing this, Yili was surprised and frowned. Then the medicine Mo Jingli brought back from Nanjiang. It was Tan Jiji who revealed the news to him. Mo Xiuyao continued, "The sacred land of Nanjiang has always been in Shu Manlin's hands. Even if Princess Xixiao's relationship with Princess Anxi is weak, she is still Princess Anxi's sister. Shu Manlin couldn't have done anything to her. The news that the sacred land of Nanjiang has this medicine could only be told by Tan Jiji or Shu Manlin." Yili was silent. If this was true, Tan Jiji must have played a part in Mo Jingqi's death. Rubbing between her eyebrows, Yili had to admit that she really wasn't suited for these schemes. If so, what do Tan Jiji and noble consort Lu want to do this time? Mo Xiuyao shook his head and said carelessly, "Don't worry. If they want to leak the news, they won't talk to the old duke. Since that's the case, they must want something. If we don't do anything, they will come to us." He was sitting in the Prince Ding mansion. Even if Mo Jingli really suspected that the Empress was in the Prince Ding mansion, would he dare to come in and search? Besides, Mo Jingli probably wanted them to take the Empress away so that he could have something against the Hua family and prevent the Hua family from causing trouble for him in the future. Mo Xiuyao had no intention of interfering in the affairs of the capital, so he didn't care about most of the things. But Feng Zhiyao and the Empress meant something different to him. Since Feng Zhiyao had brought them out, he naturally didn't mind spending some effort to take them away. Yili frowned and said, "No matter what, it's uncomfortable to have someone peeping in the dark." Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, "Since Miss Li feels uncomfortable, then we'll just deal with him. Princess consort. Something has happened." Just as they were speaking, Zhuojing rushed in and reported without even bowing. Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "The Feng family has been raided," Zhuojing reported. Mo Xiuyao faintly glanced at Zhuojing and asked, "What is this?" Although the Feng family was one of the 4 wealthiest families in Great Chu and was also Feng Zhiyao's family did not dare to offend them. But they weren't people of the Prince Ding mansion. Therefore, it didn't matter to Mo Xiuyao whether or not the Feng family was raided. Zhuojing was also a bit embarrassed. As soon as he received the news, he quickly came in to report. He forgot that the Feng family had nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion other than their relationship with Master Feng-san. Yili smiled faintly and said, "Forget it. Let's tell Feng-san. After all, he is his biological father." Zhuojing agreed. Before he turned to leave, Feng Zhiyao had already appeared outside the door and said faintly, "No need. I already know." Feng Zhiyao and the Empress walked in one after the other. Their expressions were not good. Clearly, Feng Zhiyao had rushed over after hearing about this. His face was still a bit pale, but the sadness in his eyes had dissipated a lot. Feng Xiao looked apologetically at Emo Xiuyao. Prince. Emo Xiuyao waved his hand and smiled a bit fakely. No need to apologize to I. Right now, no one in the Chu capital dares to cause trouble for I. If you don't feel guilty towards the Feng family, let's go back to Li City? Feng Xiao smiled bitterly. He didn't have any feelings towards the Feng family. But it wasn't to the point where he could ignore the Feng family being raided. In the end, he didn't have any deep hatred towards the Feng family. He just chose a different path. This time the Feng family was truly implicated by him. This subordinate will definitely take care of this matter. Feng Xiao said in a low voice. Emo Xiuyao squinted and said, how do you want to take care of it? After robbing the palace, do you want to rob the prison again? Or do you want to walk right into the trap and say that it was you, young Master Feng San, who robbed the Empress? Feng Xiao looked speechlessly at the lazy white-clothed white-haired man in front of him. They had known each other for a few decades. He understood Emo Xiuyao well enough. He was saying this to help him take care of the problem. But Feng Xiao's heart was very uneasy. This matter was indeed caused by him being too impulsive. If he had endured and come back to discuss with Emo Xiuyao might not have stopped him. He might even have helped him. Now that he had made a mistake, he needed the Prince Ding mansion to take care of it for him. This made Feng Xiao secretly regret his impulsiveness. Don't act like this in front of I. Bring Tan Jiji to the Prince Ding mansion in 3 hours. Otherwise. He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was self-evident. Feng Xiao's spirit was shaken. He said loudly, this subordinate obeys. I'll go immediately. He looked back at the Empress sitting on the side. The Empress smiled faintly and said, you go do what you need to do. I'll talk to Prince Ding and the princess. Hearing this, Feng Xiao's face lit up. His tone was a lot lighter. He looked at the Empress and said, wait for me. I'll be back soon. After speaking, he walked out of the parlor with light steps. It didn't look like he was injured at all. Seeing the bright red brocade clothes disappear at the door, the Empress sighed helplessly. She looked apologetically at Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao and said, I've troubled you. Emo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and said, Feng San has been enslaved by I for more than 10 years. It's not a big deal to occasionally help him solve some problems. I don't want to hear anything else. It's better to wait for Feng San to come back. If he comes back and you're gone, I'm afraid I'll have one less capable fighter. The Empress couldn't help but smile. She shook her head and said, after so many years, your friendship with Yao hasn't changed. Thank you for taking care of him all these years. Emo Xiuyao waved his hand indifferently and said, Feng San isn't just a subordinate of the Prince Ding mansion. He's also a brother that I grew up with. Maybe Su Qingchen was more intelligent than Feng San. Maybe Zhang Qilon and the others were better at fighting than Feng San. But only Feng San was a brother that grew up with him. He was a brother that accompanied him through the most painful years. There weren't many friendships like this in life. Maybe there were a few in the past. But after so many years, only Feng Xiao hadn't changed. Chapter 6:11. Although most of the Prince Ding mansion's power had left the capital for a long time, when Emo Xiuyao truly wanted to find someone, it was very easy. After all, the Prince Ding mansion had operated in the Chu capital for close to 200 years, not 10 or 8 years. The depth of its foundation was not something that Tan Jiji, a descendant of the previous dynasty who could barely walk in broad daylight, could understand. Therefore, when Tan Jiji was politely invited to the Prince Ding mansion by the people of the Prince Ding mansion, he still couldn't hide his shocked expression. In the main hall, Emo Xiuyao stared at the middle-aged man in the hall with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, Young Master Tan, how do you think I should greet you this time? Or, do you have something that you can use to exchange for your life with I? Hearing this, Tan Jiji really didn't want to argue. For someone like Emo Xiuyao, once he decided on the result, no matter how you argued, it was meaningless. However, he had to work hard for his name. After all, he wasn't tired of living. He smiled helplessly and said, The Prince Ding mansion's foundation is indeed deep. I have nothing to say about it falling into the hands of the prince. I don't know what I've done to anger your highness. Emo Xiuyao looked at Tan Jiji with interest. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, Could it be that young Master Tan thinks that I called you here to drink tea? Tan Jiji sighed. Of course he knew why Emo Xiuyao called him here. He just didn't think that he would be found so quickly. Sighing, Tan Jiji said straightforwardly, I can't do anything about what the prince said. Although the idea came from me, I really can't do anything about the Dechu State's court right now. Young Master Feng-san, please forgive me. After speaking, Tan Jiji cupped his hands in apology to Feng Zhiyao, whose face hadn't changed since he saw him. Feng Zhiyao sneered and ignored Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji also didn't care much and sat calmly drinking tea. Emo Shuyao leaned against the back of the chair, seemingly leisurely sizing up Tan Jiji. However, even though Tan Jiji looked calm on the surface, his heart was actually stretched taut. Emo Shuyao's gaze on him seemed ordinary, but in reality, the pressure he felt was no different from a real sword. He knew that now that he had fallen into Emo Shuyao's hands, his life or death would depend entirely on Emo Shuyao's mood. After a while, Emo Shuyao seemed to have seen enough before slowly retracting his gaze. His lips curled into a mocking smile. Young Master Tan, are you here chatting idly with I? Are you waiting for someone to save you? Tan Jiji was stunned. The smile on his face became even more bitter. Since I've already fallen into the prince's hands, I don't dare to think about it. He truly didn't have much hope for those people. Tan Jiji had always been proud of his foresight. Compared to Emo Shuyao's scheming people in the Chu capital, he was far inferior. Falling into Emo Shuyao's hands wasn't a loss. After all, he had helped Emo Shuyao plot against Emo Shuyao many times. In fact, he had almost been able to completely destroy the Prince Ding mansion. He just couldn't accept it. He had great ambitions all his life, but in the blink of an eye he was almost 40 years old and still hadn't accomplished anything. Now that he had fallen into Emo Shuyao's hands, his chances of survival were even slimmer. Emo Shuyao naturally saw the unwillingness in Tan Jiji's eyes. He looked at Tan Jiji with a smile and said, "Young Master Tan, are you unwilling to accept that all these years of hard work have been for nothing?" "I'm afraid it's not for nothing. Instead it's for someone else." Tan Jiji glanced at Yi Li, who had been sitting silently beside Emo Shuyao. He said with some annoyance, "Speaking of which, it seems that ever since the prince married the princess, the Prince Ding mansion's fortunes have changed. Rather than saying that he's making things difficult for the Prince Ding mansion, it's better to say that he wants the Prince Ding mansion to openly cut ties with the Dechu state." Emo Shuyao raised his brows and smiled at Yi Li. He turned to look at Tan Jiji with some regret. "If it weren't for those things in the past, I really hope that someone like young Master Tan can stay in the Prince Ding mansion. Actually, young Master Tan, you don't need to be upset. Even if your original plan succeeded, the person who would have the last laugh wouldn't be you. Because you've walked in the wrong direction from the start. Look at Ren Qining. Does young Master Tan still not know the difference between you and him?" Tan Jiji's expression changed. If there was anything in this world that was a sore spot for someone like Tan Jiji, it was without a doubt Ren Qining. Ever since Ren Qining appeared as a descendant of the previous dynasty and with the identity of Lin Yuan, Tan Jiji had felt very uneasy. There was only one Lin Yuan. If Ren Qining was an orphan of the previous dynasty, then what was Tan Jiji? If he wasn't a descendant of the previous dynasty, then what was the purpose of his actions in the past half of his life? Tan Jiji didn't look for Ren Qining, nor did he look for Dr. Lin to ask. Because he faintly felt that the answer was something he didn't want to see. "It seems that this matter doesn't need the prince's concern," Tan Jiji said with an ugly expression. Emo Shuyao raised his brows and said, "Indeed, it has nothing to do with I. Whether it's you or Ren Qining, I have never placed them in my eyes." "Prince, you're too confident. Don't forget how miserable the Prince Ding mansion was when it fell." Logically speaking, Tan Jiji knew that he definitely didn't dare to talk back to Emo Shuyao. But when he saw Emo Shuyao's nonchalance and indifference, the anger in his heart couldn't help but rise. The most infuriating thing wasn't that you couldn't win against your enemy, but that your enemy had never placed you in his eyes from start to finish. So, young Master Tan and Emo Jingqi have clearly done something stupid. Could it be that you think that if the Prince Ding mansion wasn't a subject of the Dechu state with Emo Jingqi's insignificant ability, he would be able to scheme against my big brother? Back then, the heir of the Prince Ding mansion, Emo Xuan, although he didn't have the same reputation as his younger brother, he was indeed one of the people that Emo Shuyao respected the most. To be able to convince someone like Emo Shuyao, it definitely wasn't something that could be done with just the identity of an older brother. And now, in this world, who can stop me? Tan Jiji snorted lightly, his eyes revealing his disbelief. But that gaze was somewhat deliberate and forced. Emo Shuyao didn't mind and waved his hand to have someone take him away. Tan Jiji still had some use, so he didn't have to kill him for now. But he definitely wouldn't let him escape from his hands a second time. Feng Jiao rudely took Tan Jiji, whose martial arts had been restrained, away, leaving only Yi Li and Emo Shuyao sitting opposite each other in the hall. Yi Li unhurriedly replaced the cold tea and poured a new cup of hot tea. She smiled at the white-haired man sitting opposite her and asked, "Prince, do you have any plans?" Someone like Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji wasn't a big deal. He had fallen into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion and had his martial arts restrained. As long as he was still in the Prince Ding mansion, even if he was thrown into jail, he wouldn't be able to leave the Prince Ding mansion, let alone find out any news. But Yi Li remembered that Dr. Lin was still in the northwest. Last time when she went back, she didn't ask Dr. Lin about Tan Jiji. After so many years of interaction and the kindness of saving her life and teaching her, Yi Li really treated that old man as a family member. She didn't want to make the old man too sad. Chapter 6:12. He's just a clown. Emo Shuyao said blandly, "Don't worry, Li Li. I will take care of the relationship between Tan Jiji and Dr. Lin." Yi Li nodded. As long as Emo Shuyao promised something, he was always very reliable. After a little consideration, she threw it to the back of her mind and said to Emo Shuyao, "There's nothing to do in the capital. Let's go back to the northwest." She was afraid that if she delayed any longer, her big brother would really get angry when they got back. Emo Shuyao nodded and smiled happily. "We took care of the Feng family's matter this time. The matter of the new emperor ascending the throne should have come to a conclusion. Then let's go back to the northwest." Although Mo Shuyao threw most of the work to Su Qingchen from time to time, he still knew that going too far was as bad as falling short. If he squeezed too much and Su Qingchen ran away, then the gains would not make up for the losses. The Feng family was very unlucky this time. Although it was said that scholars, farmers, and businessmen were the worst, businessmen who were able to reach the Feng family's level were definitely more glorious than most people. What's more, the Feng family was the only one among the 4 richest families in Dechu State that had a foothold in the capital and had some relations with the imperial family. Normally, everyone would give them some face. However, ever since the emperor passed away, the Feng family was divided into several factions. They quarreled endlessly over which side to support. Before they could reach a conclusion, the Feng family had already been cleanly raided. They didn't even have time to figure out why they were raided. The family of hundreds of people were locked up in the capital's Supreme Court's prison. As the saying goes, when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. The Feng family had been raided without any warning. From top to bottom, everyone was thrown into prison. Those who had a good relationship with them would naturally avoid them like the plague, not to mention those who were waiting for the Feng family to fall so that they could get a share of the profits. How could there be anyone to take care of them? The noble madams, young masters, and young ladies who were originally living a life of luxury were suddenly thrown into a dirty and dark prison. Naturally, they would cry endlessly. The head of the Feng family, Feng Jiao's biological father, Feng Huiting, was locked in a solitary cell. Compared to the crying of his wife, concubines, children, and the other members of the Feng family, he was much calmer. He only leaned against the wall and sat in the corner of the cell. He didn't even respond to Madame Feng's calls. As soon as Feng Jiao entered the Supreme Court, he was stopped. Originally, according to the orders from above, although Feng Jiao's relationship with the Feng family was cold, he was still a concubine son of the Feng family. He would definitely be imprisoned. However, Feng Jiao had another identity. He was Prince Ding's confidant and the deputy general of the Maoist army. The person who went to arrest them did not dare to go to the Prince Ding mansion personally to arrest them. He could only report it to his superiors, but in the end the matter was left unsettled. However, it was impossible for young Master Feng San to enter the Supreme Court to visit the Feng family. Feng Jiao gloomily stared at the Supreme Court official with a fake smile in front of him. After the Feng family was thrown into prison, he had been busy capturing Tan Jiji. He only had time to visit after completing Prince Ding's orders. However, he was blocked outside the door. It was easy to imagine how bad Feng Jiao's mood was, as he had not slept for 2 days. "Get out of my way." Feng Jiao was cold. His usually elegant smile was dyed with a bit of cruelty, but it made the person in front of him shiver involuntarily. "Young Master Feng San, for Prince Ding's sake, The court is already gracious to not make things difficult for you. Don't fail to appreciate kindness. Perhaps it was because he realized that he had been so casually frightened by a junior. The old man in front of him was anxious to regain his lost face and spoke righteously. Feng Jiao disdainfully snorted, "If you have the ability, then lock this young master up as well." This young master has never heard of the Supreme Court not allowing people to visit the prison. It was true that the Supreme Court did not allow people to casually visit the prison, but there were still some hidden rules in the officialdom. As long as one had money, there was no place that was inconvenient to go except the imperial palace. However, Feng Jiao did not plan on giving money. He looked at the righteous old man with a smile that was not a smile. "Do you need this young master to tell the people from the censorate how much benefits Official Wang has received in the Supreme Court in the past 7 years? Official Wang's expression changed. He glanced at his subordinates who had their heads down and pretended not to hear anything. He stared at Feng Jiao for a long time before dryly coughing and saying, "Since young Master Feng San is a member of the Prince Ding Mansion, this official naturally cannot come. I have come to ask young Master Feng San to quickly come out." Feng Jiao coldly laughed and said, "This young master coming here has nothing to do with the Prince Ding Mansion." After saying this, he did not care about Official Wang's expression and walked into the prison with a wave of his sleeve. As soon as he walked into the prison, he was greeted with a cold and rotten aura. Both sides of the corridor were filled with pairs of filthy black hands that wanted to pull on passers-by. Feng Jiao lightly snorted. His sharp eyes swept to the sides, and the prisoners who wanted to pull on him immediately withdrew their hands. People who had been in prison for a long time had the instinct to seek good fortune and avoid harm. Even if Feng Jiao's appearance was handsome and luxurious, like a distinguished young master from a prestigious family, the evil aura accumulated from over a decade of war was not something these prisoners could resist. The Feng family members were locked in the innermost part of the prison. Before he even stepped in, he could smell the strange stench coming from inside. Feng Jiao could not help but knit his brows. His half-closed eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. Walking into the place where the Feng family members were locked up, Feng Jiao's expression was complicated as he looked at the man resting in the innermost cell. Feng Huiting, who was almost 60 years old, looked much younger than his actual age. Even in this dark and dirty cell, he was much neater than the crying and noisy Feng family members in the next cell. Feng Jiao found that compared to when he left the capital many years ago, there was much more white hair on his temples. 6 years ago, when Feng Jiao returned to the capital, he did not listen to Su Hongyan's advice and went back to see him. Thinking about it, the father and son had already seen each other every day for 7 or 8 years. Feng Jiao closed his eyes and hid the unnecessary emotions in his eyes. Feng Jiao's sudden appearance caused the noisy Feng family members to immediately quiet down. The red-clothed man standing in the corridor was wearing a luxurious red brocade robe. No matter where he was, his handsome and outstanding appearance caused the dark cell to suddenly light up. The Feng family members were not familiar with Feng Jiao. Since Feng Jiao was 8 or 9 years old, he had spent more time in the Prince Ding mansion and outside than at home. But looking at the red-clothed man in front of them, someone finally remembered that many years ago, there was a Feng family member who was always dressed in red no matter where or when. It was Unknown who suddenly called out, "Feng Jiao. Big brother, second brother, long time no see. How have you been?" Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows and showed a slightly malicious fake smile to the 2 middle-aged men not far away. No matter how many years had passed, Feng Jiao still could not like his 2 brothers. When he was a child, they were existences that he envied and feared. When he was a teenager, they were the objects of his disgust and hatred. But now, Feng Jiao, who had long matured, had already left these 2 brothers far behind him. The hatred that he thought was deep in his bones when he was a teenager was now only a faint instinctive disgust. "Feng Jiao. Why are you here?" The second son of the Feng family, Feng Ziyuan, stared at his third brother who he had not seen for many years and asked with some displeasure. The grudges when they were young were probably just children who did not know how to behave, but the grudges when they were young were more related to interests. At that time, the Feng family forced the head of the family to drive Feng Jiao out of the Feng family because he was close to the Prince Ding mansion. After Feng Jiao followed Prince Ding to the northwest, they publicly broke off their relationship with him. But now Feng Jiao was like a fish in water in the Prince Ding mansion. On the contrary, they were reduced to this state. The faces of the 2 sons of the Feng family were not very good. Third brother. Third brother. Save me, it's none of my business. Save me. A middle-aged woman scrambled to the railing and reached out to grab Feng Jiao's clothes as she cried. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. The Lu family and Prince Li were well prepared. Not only did they capture the people of the Feng family, but they even captured their married daughter. It didn't seem like they were just threatening him and the Prince Ding mansion. Thinking of Mo Xiaoyao's casual smile when he was about to leave, Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. What are you doing here? When Feng Ziyuan called out Feng Jiao's name for the first time, Feng Whiting opened his eyes and looked at the luxurious man in red outside. An inexplicable emotion flashed through his eyes, but it quickly disappeared as he asked calmly. The cold voice made Feng Jiao's heart feel stifled, but the smile on his face became more and more brilliant. Of course I'm here to see you, father. You look good. Meddlesome. Feng Whiting said coldly, you are no longer a descendant of the Feng family. Whatever happens to the Feng family has nothing to do with you. I don't need you to come and visit me. If there's nothing else, go back. After speaking, Feng Whiting closed his eyes again and ignored Feng Jiao's changed expression. Father, what are you talking about? The Feng family's fourth young miss next to him said with dissatisfaction. Third brother is Prince Ding's confidant. Third brother must be here to save us. Third brother. Let me out quickly. Feng Jiao originally felt a little guilty, but after being provoked by Feng Whiting's cold words, anger suddenly surged in his heart. He sneered and pulled back his clothes that were grabbed by Feng Si. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. Sorry, as Master Feng said, I'm no longer a member of the Feng family. What happens to the Feng family has nothing to do with me. Right now. I'm just here to watch the show. Little bastard. Even if the Feng family is in dire straits, it's not your turn to gloat. Maybe the Feng family was harmed by a slut like you. The Lady Feng on the side suddenly cursed. Hearing this, Feng Jiao looked at the Lady Feng with some surprise. The Lady Feng had always relied on her status as the official wife. Although she never looked at a bastard like him, she always had a magnanimous and virtuous appearance on the surface. She would never do anything that would cause people to gossip. Aside from her two sons bullying her and pushing them out without leaving a trace, the Lady Feng was really not bad compared to the vicious and merciless women in the inner residence. He didn't think that she would be unable to hold back at this time. Shut up. Feng Whiting suddenly spoke and coldly said, filthy words. Could it be that after going to prison your manners were all eaten by dogs? The Lady Feng choked. She opened her mouth but couldn't say anything for a long time. Chapter 6:13. Coldly looking at Feng Whiting and Madame Wang, Feng Jiao snorted and turned his head away in disdain. It had always been like this. Ever since he was a child, his father only cared about his official wife and son. No matter how hard he tried, he was always ignored. Feng Jiao suddenly felt angry and powerless. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. A graceful white figure flashed through his mind. Feng Jiao's eyes, which had a trace of resentment, suddenly became much gentler. Yes, even without the Feng family he still had other things. Mo Xiaoyao, who grew up like a brother, and his colleagues and comrades in arms, whom he had known for many years. Perhaps soon he would have his own family. Thinking of the graceful figure in the Prince Ding mansion, the depression in Feng Jiao's heart suddenly dissipated. He raised his head and looked proudly at Feng Whiting in the corner. I have already reported to the prince. You can come out soon. In the future. In the end, he didn't say anything decisive. Feng Jiao snorted and turned to walk out. So what if they were implicated by him? His head must have been clamped by a door for him to feel guilty. Save them, and in the future they wouldn't owe each other anything. Feng Whiting silently watched the red figure turn and leave. In the dark corner, a trace of relief flashed through his old eyes. Noble consort Nyang Yang has arrived. The Prince Regent has arrived. Feng Jiao hadn't taken a few steps when a loud report came from the door. Feng Jiao raised his eyebrows. It was one thing for Mo Jingli to come, but even noble consort Lu had come. It seemed that Du Qua was right. Not only could noble consort Lu move freely in the palace, she could even leave the palace at will. It seemed that she had really grasped Prince Li's major weakness. Not in a hurry to leave, Feng Jiao turned and slowly walked back. On the other side of the cell, Noble consort Lu in white looked at the dirty environment in front of her and frowned in disgust. No amount of incense could cover up the stench in the cell. Noble consort Lu looked at Emo Jingli beside her and said unhappily, I really don't understand. Why do you have to come to a place like this in person? Emo Jingli said indifferently, I don't seem to have asked Noble consort Lu to come. Noble consort Lu snorted. Of course, Emo Jingli didn't ask her to come. However, Tan Jiji was missing and there was no one around her to give her advice. If she did not follow him, how would she know what Emo Jingli was up to? Emo Jingli didn't care about the dark and filthy cell. He walked in and said, You don't have to treat I like this. The Feng family is just a businessman. Even if I want to do something I won't do it to them. Noble consort Lu's heart moved. The Feng family did not have enough power to move Emo Jingli in the court, but their money was enough to move anyone. Do you want the Feng family's money? Emo Jingli said indifferently, Do you think the Feng family is easy to offend? Because of your words I confiscated the entire Feng family. Since you have already offended them, why don't you just offend them so that they will never rise again? You make it sound nice. The Feng family is Emo Jingqi's people. Naturally they will not be loyal to you. Instead of letting others take advantage of them, it is better to accept them yourself. Even if I didn't do this, you would have done something to the Feng family sooner or later. Noble consort Lu sneered. Emo Jingli didn't deny it. While talking, the two had turned the corner and reached the innermost part of the cell. However, they saw a figure who shouldn't have been here standing leisurely in the corridor. He stood with his arms crossed and looked at them with a smile. Feng Jiao, how dare you? Noble consort Lu narrowed her eyes slightly and sneered. The smile on Feng Jiao's face deepened as if he was in a very good mood. No matter how bold I am, I can't compare with noble consort. Ah no, it's great noble consort who is about to be buried with me. As an imperial concubine, how dare you leave the palace at will? As an imperial concubine who is going to be buried with me, how dare you still live? Feng Jiao. Noble consort Lu gritted her teeth and stared at Feng Jiao with a cold face. The Prince Ding mansion caught eyes, people. You go back and tell Prince Ding that I will personally go to him to ask for them. Feng Jiao waved his hand and smiled. You don't have to go to him personally. I'm afraid that noble consort Lu has an ulterior motive. Asking for the people is fake and taking the opportunity to pester our prince is the real reason. Our princess is very jealous, so for the peace of the prince and the Prince Ding mansion, I will decline noble consort Lu's kindness on behalf of the prince. How dare you? Noble consort Lu angrily rebuked. She wasn't afraid of the whole world knowing that she liked Emo Xiuyao, but she also hated others who mocked her affection. Emo Jingli frowned and unhappily interrupted the verbal contest between the two. I didn't come to listen to your nonsense. Fengsen, you're really bold. Do you think that you can break into the Supreme Court with the support of the Prince Ding mansion? Feng Jiao smiled faintly. Not at all. Prince, you flatter me. Didn't His Highness raid the Feng family without any evidence or crime? Compared to your Highness, this one's ability is simply not worth mentioning. Seeing Feng Jiao, he naturally thought of the people behind Feng Jiao. This made Emo Jingli couldn't help but frown. He didn't want to fight with Emo Xiuyao now, nor did he plan to provoke Emo Xiuyao. But Emo Xiuyao stayed in the capital for a long time, which made many of his plans unable to be implemented. Emo Jingli didn't ask noble consort Lu why she wanted to capture the people of the Feng family. He was going to make a move against the Feng family anyway. With noble consort Lu as a shield, it was much better for his reputation. Why not? But he always thought that the relationship between Feng San and the Feng family was weak. Feng San intervened in the Feng family's affairs on behalf of himself or the position of the entire Prince Ding mansion. Emo Xiuyao also had his eyes on the fat meat of the Feng family. Frowning, Emo Jingli asked, How is Prince Ding? Feng Jiao looked at Emo Jingli in front of him in surprise. A scholar who has been away for 3 days must be looked at with new eyes. If Emo Jingli mentioned Emo Xiuyao a few years ago, it would be considered very well-mannered if he didn't curse or ridicule him. Now he could actually ask so calmly. Sure enough, power was the easiest thing to change a person's appearance. Nodding, Feng Jiao said with a smile, Thank you for your concern, Prince Li. Our prince has always been well. Is that so? Emo Jingli said, I seem to have heard that Shilin Genom of Gojoseon seems to be interested in increasing the number of troops at the border. I wonder if Prince Ding has any plans? Feng Jiao said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Prince said that he is on vacation. Everything is handed over to young Master Qingchen to handle. I'm afraid that Prince will have to ask young Master Qingchen about this matter. Mo Jingli and Feng Jiao could be considered acquaintances. He knew that if he really beat around the bush with him, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to talk about anything serious until tomorrow morning. He could only take the initiative to change the topic. Young Master Feng, are you here to see Master Feng? Feng Jiao shrugged as an answer. Mo Jingli said faintly, speaking of the Feng family's matter, the Prince Ding mansion is also somewhat related. However, I don't have the final say on this matter. Otherwise, for the sake of Prince Ding, it's not a big deal to make things easy for young Master Feng. Feng Jiao looked down. Was Mo Jingli telling him that he wasn't the one who was targeting the Feng family? He sneered in his heart. He would be a fool to believe Mo Jingli. He glanced at noble consort Lu beside him faintly. This woman was probably the one who was being used. Sure enough, she was an idiot with a beautiful face. No wonder Prince didn't like her. Chapter 6:14. Thank you, Prince, for your concern. I'm just here to take a look. Anyway, the Feng family doesn't need me to worry about someone who has been expelled from the family, right? Presumably, Prince and noble consort Lu have other matters to attend to, so I'll take my leave first. Feng Jiao was about to leave after casually cupping his hands in salute to Mo Jingli and noble consort Lu. Wait. Noble consort Lu suddenly spoke. Feng Jiao turned around and looked at noble consort Lu indifferently. Noble consort Lu proudly said, "You can't leave." Feng Jiao suddenly smiled. Why not? You trespassed into the Supreme Court. Do you think the Supreme Court is a place where you can come and go as you please? Noble consort Lu said coldly. So, noble consort Lu just wanted to find an excuse to make him stay. Feng Jiao didn't care and asked indifferently, "What do you want? If I want to leave, can you make me stay?" Feng Jiao's skills were a bit difficult to deal with a first-rate master like Mo Xiaoyao. But it wasn't difficult to deal with Mo Jingli and noble consort Lu in this narrow alley. Before he finished speaking, Mo Jingli had already retreated to the side without leaving a trace. He had fought with Feng Jiao when he was young and knew that he was no match for him. In this narrow cell, not many guards could get in. If he was caught or accidentally injured by Feng Jiao, it wouldn't look good. Noble consort Lu certainly didn't want to fight with Feng Jiao. She sneered, "If you dare to leave, I'll kill Feng Huiting." Feng Jiao looked down. After a while, he sighed helplessly and threw a short knife on the ground from his sleeve. He spread his hands at noble consort Lu to show that he didn't have a weapon. Noble consort Lu was satisfied. She waved her hand and had someone come forward to catch Feng Jiao. At the same time she ordered, "Bring Feng Huiting out as well. I want to take these two away. Kingly, is that all right?" Mo Jingli said impatiently. What he wanted was the Feng family's assets. In the past few years, the two sons of the Feng family had taken over the family business one after another. It didn't matter whether Feng Huiting was there or not. However, he still reminded him, "You'd better be careful. Don't overreach yourself. If you anger Mo Xiaoyao, you won't have to die with him." Noble consort Lu snorted discontentedly. From the bottom of her heart, she didn't believe that Mo Xiaoyao would kill her. "I naturally know my limits." Feng Jiao was taken away by noble consort Lu without any resistance. Only Feng Huiting was with him. The rest of the Feng family was left to Mo Jingli to deal with. Feng Jiao didn't care about what Mo Jingli planned to do. At least compared to the half-crazy Mo Jingqi and the self-righteous noble consort Lu, Mo Jingli still knew his limits most of the time. The Feng family fell into his hands. As long as the people of the Prince Ding mansion were still in the capital, at least their names were guaranteed. Inside the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiaoyao, who had just received a report from his subordinate, raised his sword-like eyebrows and asked with a smile, "So Feng Jiao was captured by noble consort Lu?" The shadow guard, who was standing a few steps away, couldn't help but tremble. He wanted to retreat a little further without leaving a trace to avoid the prince's seemingly peaceful but actually icy cold flames. But when he met Mo Xiaoyao's smiling eyes, he froze. He braced himself and replied, "Prince, noble consort Lu not only captured young Master Feng San from the Supreme Court, but also took away the Feng family's patriarch, Feng Huiting." Emo Xiuyao snorted softly and didn't speak. Yili raised her hand and covered Emo Xiuyao's arm. She smiled faintly and said, Feng Huiting is Feng San's father after all. If Feng San really doesn't care, then he wouldn't be Feng San. How many people in this world could have a heart of stone that didn't care about anything? No matter how much the Feng family neglected Feng Jiao, Feng Huiting was still Feng Jiao's biological father. It was impossible for Feng Jiao to not care about him at all. Just like Leng Haoyu. Leng Haoyu's days in the Leng family might not be better than Feng Jiao's, but when he heard that Leng Huai was besieged, Leng Haoyu still remembered it like it was something. Emo Shuyao rolled his eyes unhappily. He looked at Yili with some grievance and said, I didn't say that I wouldn't save Feng Huiting. Why is Feng San sacrificing himself now? Yili smiled and said, I'm afraid this is an accident. Feng Jiao might not have known that noble consort Lu and Prince Li would so coincidentally choose to go to the Supreme Court at that time. It seems that this time not only the Lu family, but even Prince Li is involved in the Feng family's matter. Emo Shuyao was not surprised. Now most of the power in the capital is in the hands of Emo Jingli. Without his consent, the Lu family would have to think twice if they want to touch the Feng family. I'm afraid that it's not the Lu family that wants to touch the Feng family, but Emo Jingli that wants to touch the Feng family. Yili's heart moved. She looked at Emo Shuyao and said, the Feng family's property? Emo Jingli controls the wealthiest place in the entire Dechu state. After all these years he shouldn't be lacking money. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, that's not necessarily true. Although Emo Jingli controls most of the southern part of the Dechu state, his foundation is still very weak. In the end his foundation is shallow. Jiangnan has a lot of aristocratic families and their relationships are complicated. It's not that easy for Emo Jingli to get money from these people. And raising an army is a money-burning matter. You're saying Emo Jingli is secretly expanding the army? Yili naturally understood. She couldn't help but frown when she thought of her own guess. Emo Shuyao smiled and nodded. Emo Jingli hasn't just wanted that dragon throne for a day or two. When the new emperor ascends the throne, we'll return to the northwest. I won't be in the mood to play with him. Yili frowned and pondered for a moment before saying, since it's like this, why must we wait until the new emperor ascends the throne? Because I like to make things difficult for him. As long as Emo Shuyao was in the capital, even if Emo Jingli really wanted to usurp the throne, he wouldn't have the guts. Prince. The subordinate who didn't get a reply was still standing alone in the hall. He pitifully looked at Emo Shuyao, who had clearly forgotten about his existence. Is there anything else? Emo Shuyao asked. Finally finding a chance to speak, the pitiful person hurriedly used the fastest speed to clearly report what she wanted to say. Just now, I received news from Noble Consort Lu that Noble Consort Lu will be visiting Ding Palace tomorrow morning and has some matters to discuss with Wang Yi. Wang Yi, please do not refuse. A certain person who was holding her breath and did not pause for even a moment breathed a sigh of relief. Noble Consort Lu? Visit? Don't refuse? Emo Shuyao asked with a smile. The messenger was crying in his heart. Your Highness, this subordinate is just a messenger. This has nothing to do with me. Yili laughed and pulled Emo Shuyao. She smiled at the subordinate and said, all right, Prince knows. You can leave. Thank you, Princess. This subordinate will take his leave. The person who let out a sigh of relief turned around and disappeared from the entrance of the hall. In an unknown prison cell, Feng Jiao sat leisurely on the simple bed in the cell. Feng Huiting, who was locked in the cell next door, was still sitting on the bed with his eyes closed. He had no intention of communicating with Feng Jiao. Feng Jiao sat at the head of the bed and looked at the man in front of him whose hair was almost white. He snorted softly and walked to the railing to knock on it a few times. After a while someone came in and stared vigilantly at Feng Jiao. He asked, Third young Master Feng, what is the matter? Feng Jiao was instantly amused. You know me? Feng Jiao casually looked at the inconspicuous middle-aged man in front of him. He didn't have any impression of him, but he could see that his martial arts weren't bad. Feng Jiao said, bring me a cloak. Do you want to freeze this young master to death? The middle-aged man faintly glanced at Feng Jiao and turned to leave. After a while he came in with a dark green brocade rabbit skin cloak. He handed it to Feng Jiao and then turned to leave. Feng Jiao looked at the dark green cloak in his hand and smiled thoughtfully. He raised his hand and the cloak passed through the bars of the two cells without any obstruction and landed on Feng Huiting's body. Feng Huiting opened his eyes and stared blankly at the cloak on his body. He tilted his head to look at Feng Jiao next to him. Feng Jiao had already slowly walked back to his bed and was facing the wall on the other side, ignoring him. It was the middle of March. Even outside one could feel a bit of coldness, much less in the dark dungeon. As soon as the cloak was on his body, the coldness that had been on his body dissipated greatly. Feng Huiting silently gathered the cloak around his body and looked at the man in the thin red robe across from him. His eyes revealed a rare softness. Feng Jiao was a martial artist and had been on the battlefield for many years. Naturally, he could feel the gaze on his body. He originally wanted to ignore it in a fit of pique, but the gaze didn't move from his body, making him gradually feel uncomfortable. He suddenly turned around and said unhappily, "If you have something to say, just say it." Without waiting for Feng Huiting to speak, Feng Jiao continued, "You don't need to think too much. This time you were implicated by me. Don't worry, I will guarantee that the Feng family will walk out of prison safely." "What did you do?" After a long silence, Feng Huiting asked in a deep voice. Feng Jiao squeezed out a strange smile and looked at Feng Huiting with a trace of deliberate malice. "I kidnapped someone from the palace." As the head of the Feng family, Feng Huiting naturally had his own channels of information. Even if someone in the palace went missing, he would still know a thing or two. Hearing Feng Jiao's words, his expression couldn't help but change slightly. After a long while, he said in a deep voice, "After so many years, you still can't let it go?" This time it was Feng Jiao's turn to be stunned. He really didn't expect Feng Huiting to know his thoughts back then. He looked at the man across from him with a somewhat complicated expression. After a long while, he anxiously growled, "This has nothing to do with you." The empty cell suddenly fell silent. It was so quiet that it was as if the two people's breathing could be heard. After a long while, Feng Huiting said, "You are so daring because you have Prince Ding's support? If Prince Ding is unwilling or can't help you, what will you do?" Feng Jiao was stunned for a moment, then sneered, "Isn't it a bit late to teach me a lesson now?" Feng Jiao did feel very guilty for acting impulsively this time, but when faced with Feng Huiting's cold expression and tone, he couldn't calm down and speak properly. Feng Huiting calmly looked at him for a long time, then finally sighed softly and didn't say anything more. Feng Jiao stared blankly at Feng Huiting, who closed his eyes and didn't speak anymore. His heart was filled with mixed feelings and he didn't know what to think. Chapter 6:15. In the Prime Minister's mansion. In the study, Prime Minister Lu looked at his daughter who was sitting on the side with an indifferent look and frowned. He walked back and forth in the study room with his hands behind his back. After a while, he turned around and stared at noble concubine Lu. "Daughter, what do you want?" Noble concubine Lu raised her head and said unhappily, "What?" Prime Minister Lu said angrily, "What? Why do you ask? We had a good discussion before. Why do you want to mess with Mo Shuyao at this time?" Noble concubine Lu frowned slightly. "How did I mess with Mo Shuyao?" Prime Minister Lu had a headache. It was good to have a smart, beautiful and spoiled daughter, but it was a headache to have a disobedient daughter. Rubbing his forehead, Prime Minister Lu took a deep breath and said calmly, "We had a deal. First we will deal with the matter of the burial. Now that this matter hasn't been resolved and you've provoked Mo Shuyao, if he suddenly interferes, you have to know that Father and Prince Li are still suppressing this matter under the pressure of those scholars and old pedants. As long as Prince Ding says something, those people will make trouble again." Noble concubine Lu supported her head with her hands and looked at Prime Minister Lu indifferently. "What do you want? No matter what, you should let Feng Jiao go first. He is Mo Shuyao's man. Since Mo Shuyao has said that he has no intention of interfering in the affairs in the capital, we should not mess with him for the time being." Noble concubine Lu said unhappily, "Prince Ding took Tan Jiji away. Father, don't you know what Feng Jiao did?" "No matter what he did," Prime Minister Lu said firmly, "he took the Empress away, so what? It is not bad for us. If the Empress is still alive, she will be the Empress Dowager when the new emperor ascends the throne. At that time, the Hua family will be able to help the new emperor openly. Isn't it good now? The new emperor is still young. If his birth mother dies early, then as the previous emperor's imperial concubine, you will naturally be the most powerful person in the palace. What's more, Hua clan has such a weakness in our hands. By then, Prime Minister Lu showed a smug smile when he thought of the situation where Hua clan was under the foot of Lu clan or even under the control of Lu clan. Noble consort Lu lowered her eyes, and a trace of disdain flashed across her eyes. The most powerful person in the palace? So what? Even if it was the position of Empress Dowager, if she didn't have that person, what was the use of those noble positions? Prime Minister Lu turned around and saw the sneer and disdain on noble concubine Lu's lips. He frowned and asked, "Haven't you given up on Prince Ding?" Seeing noble concubine Lu's determined eyes, Prime Minister Lu felt extremely uncomfortable. He was about to spit out a mouthful of blood in his chest. What sin had he committed to have such a disappointing daughter? What a sin! It has been so many years. If Prince Ding likes you, he wouldn't have waited until now. Why are you still? Prime Minister Lu tried his best to persuade her. Shut up. What Prime Minister Lu said really touched noble concubine Lu's bottom line. Her delicate face was instantly covered with a layer of anger. Noble concubine Lu glared at her father in front of her. She gritted her teeth and said, "I don't believe it. He doesn't dislike me. He just didn't kill me." Prime Minister Lu didn't know what to say at that moment. Prime Minister Lu didn't know what to say. He really didn't understand where the Lu family's education had failed to raise such a stubborn daughter. A woman in her 30s would be a grandmother in an ordinary family. Even if she didn't enter the palace, she should be a lady in charge of a noble family. How could a woman at her age care about a man wholeheartedly? And a man who didn't care about her at all? Then, Prime Minister Lu sighed and stamped his feet. Noble concubine Lu didn't care about her father's anxiety. She showed a faint but sweet smile. "Yes, that's right. He just didn't see me. Tomorrow I will go to the Prince Ding mansion to see him. He will definitely understand how I feel about him." "Are you sure he won't kick you out?" Prime Minister Lu poured cold water on her mercilessly. Noble concubine Lu caught Prince Ding's people. The most likely reaction of Prince Ding was to detain noble concubine Lu as well. At that time they would still have to exchange people for her. Maybe they would have to pay a higher price. Prime Minister Lu didn't think that Emo Xiao would pay a high price for Feng Xiao. After all, Feng Xiao was just a subordinate. If Prince Ding got angry because of this, it would be more likely that his dignity was challenged. Prime Minister Lu really couldn't admit that this daughter was taught by him. Noble concubine Lu smiled confidently. "No, unless he doesn't want Feng San to die." Prime Minister Lu sneered. "Why are you going to see him? Do you want him to marry you? Don't tell me you don't know that Prince Ding loves the princess deeply. For so many years he only has Princess Ding by his side. Do you think Prince Ding will betray his wife for Feng San?" Not only that, Prime Minister Lu was also a man. From a man's point of view, it was absolutely impossible for him to abandon Princess Ding, who was also outstanding in appearance and ability and had been in the same boat with him. For a woman who had been married and had given birth to another man's child, even if that woman was as beautiful as a fairy, abandoning his wife for pure beauty was a despicable thing to do. Prime Minister Lu wasn't a good man, but he wasn't despicable either. How could Prince Ding do something that even he disdained to do? Noble concubine Lu looked at Prime Minister Lu strangely. "Father, I really don't understand. Don't you know that both the new emperor and Emo Jingli are far inferior to Prince Ding? As long as Emo Xiao wants, he can get as much as the Dechu state. If I get better, the Lu family will get better. Why are you so against it?" Prime Minister Lu bitterly smiled in his heart, but once again confirmed that he had failed to educate his daughter. It seemed that it was time to give up. Fortunately, 2 of his granddaughters were about to reach marriageable age. Although they weren't as beautiful and talented as his daughter, they were still excellent. King Li and King Qin had to be careful. As for Prince Ding, Prime Minister Lu had never considered the possibility of relying on Prince Ding. Not only because of the dirty relationship between the Lu family and the Prince Ding mansion, but also because Emo Xiao's behavior was completely different from the Lu family's. Even if Prince Ding really married noble concubine Lu, the Lu family wouldn't get any benefits from it. Helplessly waving his hand, Prime Minister Lu said blandly, "All right, since you don't want to listen to me, then do whatever you want. But I just hope that you won't bring trouble to the Lu family. In the future, you don't have to come back." After all, you are a concubine of the late emperor. It's not appropriate for you to always go out of the palace. Noble concubine Lu paused, looking at Prime Minister Lu confusedly. For so many years her father had never talked to her in this tone. It wasn't anger or coldness, but a faint disheartened and alienated feeling. Instinctively, noble concubine Lu didn't like this feeling. Father, all right, you can go now. Oh, right, I plan to marry Xian to King Li. Prime Minister Lu told her his plan. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.